Greetings, and welcome to the Cracked Love Chronicles. As I look out over the mountainside, the vivid red shades of the autumn leaves unfold before my eyes. I find myself in awe of the intricate and sometimes perilous journey that has led me to this very moment. Upon completing high school in the mid-70s, opportunities for employment were limited. One morning, after wrapping up a late-night dishwashing shift, I decided to take a shortcut home and noticed a help wanted sign. I spent my formative years in Cicero, a Chicago suburb notorious for its connections to Al Capone, home to one of the largest cemeteries in the Midwest, and a place where local politics are among the most corrupt you'll encounter outside of Detroit. In Cicero, lacking political connections or a union position often meant facing significant challenges. In spite of this, the town thrummed with the excitement of rail sightings and the pulse of heavy industry. The earth appeared to quiver as I neared the office displaying the help wanted sign. As I pushed the door open, I steeled myself for whatever awaited me beyond. They didn't show much excitement regarding my inexperience with heavy industrial equipment, yet I negotiated for that position as if it were a matter of life and death. I accepted the pay for dishwashers for the initial 4 months while I worked to demonstrate my capabilities. It nearly took my whole paycheck for union dues, yet Dad believed I was making the right choice. I was envisioning what lies ahead. Mom endured her unhappiness quietly, as her heart longed for the joy that grandchildren would bring. After spending a few years as an operator of a 12-ton press, I attended a Halloween mixer and crossed paths with Evelyn. There was an undeniable connection between us. After a year and a half of being together, I proposed to her. She was absolutely delighted. We exchanged vows in front of the local judge, as she held strong Baptist beliefs while I found myself in a more neutral stance. Her father had ties to the political scene in the city. He considered me a good boy for being part of a union and maintaining a steady job. He invested in a charming 2-bedroom home featuring a 2-car garage, nestled in a desirable neighborhood. I placed the first deposit on a 4-door Ford sedan, which is as large as a battleship. It wasn't an alluring model, and it had terrible fuel efficiency, but it was secure for my loved one to drive. Moreover, we seldom ventured beyond the city limits. Our Sunday afternoons were dedicated to visiting our parents' homes, engaging in pleasant conversation and reminiscing over old photo albums. I discovered so much about my family that was previously unknown to me. For instance, I had a great uncle who retired from the Navy, purchased a mountain in southeast Kentucky, and chose to live as a hermit. We continued our efforts to have children, but she experienced a series of miscarriages. After the 5th attempt, she felt disheartened. The atmosphere in the Baker household was undeniably grim. I sought additional training at my job and ultimately secured the prized tool in Dislet. It arrived with an incredible increase. We began setting aside funds for our future retirement. Evelyn grew weary of languishing at home, subjected to the dreary monotony of daytime television. It was hard to hold her accountable. She returned to academia to pursue an MBA. That pretty much encapsulated our way of life for around 7 years. Evelyn has earned her MBA. We threw an extravagant celebration and definitely overspent on it. Yet, it brought joy to Evelyn. Then the situation began to deteriorate. She was absent when I returned home. She had stopped speaking to me altogether. I observed some lovely new skirts, blouses, and shoes in her closet. She requested individual beds. A chilling sensation settled deep within me. I never gave it a second thought during our marriage. My libido wasn't particularly strong. Of course, I observed, but I never laid a finger on it. I rarely engaged in flirting, let alone striking up a conversation with a girl. I found myself pondering whether the same could be true for my partner. It seemed to me that someone at that college had built her up, sparking her interest, and then made grand promises that were impossible to keep. It all reached a breaking point when I received the divorce papers. I experienced a peculiar sensation, as though another presence was in control of my body. I recalled visions filled with piercing cries. Evelyn found herself in the hospital for a few days, unexpectedly. She was covered under my work insurance, so there wasn't really an issue. She remained silent about her reasons for seeking the attention. Having evidence of my marriage allowed me to obtain a copy of her records. She experienced another loss. For 2 years, we had been resting in different beds. Mom and Dad were still with us, though they were barely holding on. My father emphasized the importance of self-protection. I visited the bank and took every precaution to ensure that our retirement account would necessitate both of our signatures for any withdrawals. I proceeded to open an account at a bank in Oak Park, utilizing half of our checking funds. I engaged a legal professional from beyond Cicero. Vince had been navigating the complexities of divorce for quite some time. He possessed a clever strategy that was said to be effective for individuals who opted for a civil ceremony instead of one conducted by a religious figure. He remarked that it required the right judge to piece everything together, yet it was achievable. After he outlined his vision for its operation, I committed to giving him a quarter of the retirement fund. Vince navigated the game expertly, securing the judge he desired by skillfully managing the schedule. Vince attempted to secure everything by asserting that our civil arrangement constituted a contract. According to contractual law, the party terminating the agreement held no entitlement to the corporation's assets. The judge was not convinced this time. The atmosphere was thick with tension. She authorized her lawyer to unleash a relentless pursuit against me, aiming to strip me of every last dollar and possession I had. I rose to my feet. I was reluctant to share this, and my attorney is unaware of it. I didn't want to tarnish her reputation. Yet, the moment has arrived. I passed the copy of her medical records to the bailiff. The final note pertains to the necessity of bed rest after experiencing a miscarriage. For the past 2 years, we have been resting in different beds. Kindly take note of the date of entry. Bam! I felt no sympathy for her. Her father had a fortune amounting to several million. She would always have food and a place to call home. After the trial, I went to see her father. Well, you've certainly got guts coming here. I gently shook my head. I am certain that she will always have a place to call home and plenty to eat. She is your daughter. I have returned to present the house to you once more. It was a present for the wedding. He reclined in his chair, surveying me with a keen gaze. I knew I was correct from the beginning. You're a wonderful companion. Hold on to it. Follow your desires. I will ultimately decide to sell the property. I've experienced some serious setbacks. I'm relocating to my great-uncle's mountain in Kentucky. I doubt I will ever wish to encounter a woman again for the rest of my days. His weighty hand settled on my shoulder. I'm willing to offer you $50,000 above the market rate. It's a charming spot with excellent schools nearby. I have friends who could benefit from it. We clasped hands firmly. I would be gone in a week. The most challenging task was modifying the retirement account to allow my signature exclusively. The papers for the dissolution of marriage did it. That ensured the lawyer received their payment. I exchanged the Ford for a long bed Econoline van. It required some suspension repairs, fresh tires, a new exhaust, and a complete overhaul of the high-voltage components under the hood, but it transformed into a pleasant drive. The previous owners didn't smoke, so the interior was in much better condition than it might have been otherwise. The small AM/FM radio functioned perfectly. I packed my bed, a table, 2 chairs, a full dresser, and a plethora of kitchen items into it. I needed to replace the rear shocks with a new set of air shocks. I really only desired a few essentials from the place: my clothes, towels, and bedding. I gathered the rugs and packed them into the empty spaces of the van's cargo area. The suitcase sat in the passenger seat, accompanied by a cooler. I found myself at the age of 40, and it was the beginning of 1988. I possessed $70,000 in my bank account along with a promissory note amounting to $170,000 for the property. I stayed with my parents for a bit until the payment was processed. I had a rather negative view of women overall. I would not even consider going through a grocery store checkout line if a woman was at the register. Emotions surged within me, revealing depths of anger I had never acknowledged before. Mom and Dad were spiraling downwards quickly. They were aware of it and held no resentment towards the reality. They assisted me in gathering all the details available about Uncle AL's location, Bloody Mountain. The tale unfolded as half the mountain ignited with flame bush each fall, casting an eerie glow that made the entire mountainside appear drenched in blood during the evening light. The family had been dutifully paying the insignificant property tax on it for over 30 years since his passing. They retrieved the property deed from the family's safe deposit box for me, along with all the tax payment receipts. The only account we had of the location was a journal that I examined with great attention. The location seemed to be a quaint little cabin nestled in a fold of the mountain. Uncle Al acquired the property after discovering a cave. The cabin stood proudly before the mouth of the cave. By all measures, it was quite an impressive cave by the time he had completed his work on it. It featured running water, and he had undertaken some blasting work in the 50s to level the floor, tidy up the walls, and overall enhance its livability. His journal remarked that a single small fire in the stove maintained a cozy atmosphere throughout the year. I concluded that it would be wise to acquire a chainsaw or two, a device for sharpening chains, and a mentor to guide me in its use. I will require a substantial amount of firewood. I wandered into the largest store I could locate. After capturing someone's interest, I managed to secure a lesson on the proper maintenance and operation of a chainsaw, which notably included tips on avoiding any unfortunate accidents with my legs. Once I figured out how to use a jig, sharpening a chain became surprisingly straightforward. I purchased a pair of steel 420 chainsaws featuring 20-inch bars, along with a spool of chain. I was completely unaware of what awaited me, as only local hunters had set foot on the property for around 30 years. I purchased a chain hoist, a brace and bits, a few hinges, a tarp, and a cot to rest on while I worked on getting the cabin ready. After the property check cleared, I embraced my parents, likely for the final time. I longed to bring them along, yet deep down, I understood it wouldn't be feasible. Similarly, I found it impossible to remain in Cicero. I played the horn. Danger. The nearest major city to the mountain was Kentucky. I navigated my way to Lexington with relative ease and secured a hotel room for the night. Fortune smiled upon me when I stumbled across an advertisement for a gun show that weekend at the Lexington Armory, located just north of town. As soon as I began to grow hair, my dad would take me to a spot in central Wisconsin, Niantu, each summer. We set up camp, enjoyed some fishing, and had a blast shooting at numerous paper targets. I was highly skilled with a .22 rifle. I had a few opportunities to fire a rifle that was nearly ubiquitous among foot soldiers during World War II, the Garand M1. I adored the thing, even though it had a powerful kick. No one was willing to make a sale to me because my driver's license came from Illinois. I had the brilliant notion of revealing the D to the mountain out east close to Hazard. That shifted their perspective. Various grades of M1s exist. They all fire essentially the same round, with the exception of a specific batch created for the Navy that utilized the 7.62 by 51 NATO round. The same round utilized nearly everywhere across the globe. The 30.06 Winchester was becoming increasingly elusive. I purchased a precision-grade rifle designed for NATO ammunition. As I strolled through the exhibition in search of a fine .22 rifle, a fellow approached me and inquired if I was interested in any ammunition for it. I certainly did. But when I mentioned it was chambered for the NATO round, he seemed to scrunch his face in disappointment. He gestured towards a man seated at a table in the rear, close to a large, open garage door. He stored the majority of his inventory outdoors. I purchased 10 ammo cans filled with rounds already in in-block clips intended for the M1. Every case contained approximately 320 rounds. I maneuvered the van to his trailer to begin loading. Before I departed, I handed the individual at the announcement table $20 to request anyone with a Savage Model 93 available for sale to come forward. 3 individuals arrived. I spent approximately $300 on a bolt-action .22 Magnum rifle featuring iron sights. Finding ammunition proved to be quite a challenge, yet I successfully secured 750 rounds packaged in 50-round boxes. I needed to proceed cautiously with the van to reach the rest of my destination out east. After a few days of effort, I finally reached my goal. The nearest town to the mountain was Harlan. It wasn't particularly small since it served as the county seat. I secured a hotel room in town, obtained my driver's license and van tags, then made my way to the sheriff's office to inform him that Bloody Mountain had a new occupant. I inquired whether there would be any issues with my search for the table. Negative, as long as I possessed the title to the estate. That afternoon, I discovered the road, or more accurately, the trail that wound its way up to the cabin. The van definitely couldn't navigate the way the road was positioned. I strolled through the experience. It opened up to the remnants of the cabin, situated about 4/5 of the way to the summit, just above where the crimson bush flourished. I returned to town in search of someone with a dozer or a grader to bring in some gravel, fill the ruts, and level the road. I found myself in town for just over a week, waiting for him to finally make his way to me. I dedicated some time to acquiring a sturdy chain, several sets of screw-type wood bits, large nut bolt and washer assemblies, angle iron, pre-drilled flat steel, and a box of substantial screw-in lag bolts. A farm implement company offered a substantial socket wrench set featuring an impressive breaker bar. It featured the John Deere logo stamped directly into the metal components, all neatly contained within a black plastic blow-molded case. One of those sockets would perfectly accommodate the lag bolts. I purchased a few extras of that size. Once the road was complete, I settled my account with the man, stocked my cooler with meat and ice, and set off to discover the surprises that Mother Nature had in store for me. The cabin was exactly as I had envisioned it when I first laid eyes on it. The draw was somewhat damp, and the cabin had long since collapsed. I assembled a drag hook using angle and flat iron, attached it to the chain, reversed towards the front of the cabin, and engaged the engine in low gear. After 6 attempts, I successfully cleared the foundation. I slowly tossed all the decaying refuse into the woods beside the road. It was nearly dark by the time I completed it. My bed for the night consisted of a tarp, a cot, and a blanket. I found myself in the woods, utilizing a shovel and a roll of paper towels for a rather unconventional necessity. After that, I cooked a steak for breakfast. I took measurements of the foundation and utilized the van's hood as a makeshift ladder to gauge the height of the old ceiling peak from the markings on the rock wall. I needed to clear away the layers of dirt that had built up in front of the cliff before I could swing the masonry door open, revealing the cave nestled within the mountain. This was part of my plan. I packed a few good lanterns for the journey. Beyond a narrow corridor, the cave expanded into a flattened cone, measuring approximately 70 feet in depth and 40 feet in width at its rear. The height of the ceiling was truly remarkable. It ascended to approximately 20 feet or higher towards the back. To the right, almost at the back, a powerful stream of water cascaded through a fissure in the wall and vanished about 8 feet away into a dark opening. I must have made some adjustments to the waterbed, as it resembled a large bathtub. The warmth of the water, just above body temperature, caught me off guard. The vintage stove appeared to be in excellent condition. The stovepipe slanted into a shadowy crevice, obscured from my view. His old table was sturdy and dependable, constructed with the same robustness as a butcher block. The chair had disintegrated, just like the bed frame. The ancient mattress bore a shroud of dark mildew. I hauled all the unnecessary items out to the curb. I utilized a garden rake and a push broom to tidy up the area. I was hesitant to place any of my belongings inside until I had meticulously sprayed the entire area with bleach, ensuring that every last mildew spore was eradicated. With a final, contented glance around, I shut the heavy door and stacked a small pile of trash in front of it. I possessed a bit of cash to utilize. Initially, I received a quote for a vintage John Deere tractor equipped with a hydraulic bucket and a dozer blade. I examined it, along with the engine hours. It lacked a cab, yet it featured a roll bar. It was a Model 4630 from 1974. It boasted 180 horses and appeared as though it had tumbled a few times before being meticulously reshaped and given a fresh coat of paint. I needed it for dragging trees out of the forest and operating a wood splitter, not for its aesthetics. Indeed, he possessed a splitter mounted on his tractor as well. He was asking for $16,000 for the tractor, $1,200 for the hydraulic bucket complete with new hoses, $900 for a nearly new dozer blade, and $600 for the used splitter that also had new hydraulic hoses. Once I got it running and took it for a spin around the lot, I inquired about the cost to rebuild the engine, clutch, and transmission. I believe $2,400 was an incredible bargain. I issued him a check to ensure everything is delivered by the end of the month. He possessed a flatbed, so it would pose no issue. I understood that my interactions with him would continue regarding lithium grease and additional attachments as time progressed. I have intentions of cultivating a garden in the near future. A nearby fuel supplier has consented to maintain a full 200-gallon diesel tank for me, naturally with a deposit involved. I contemplated extensively the task of performing all that drilling and bolting manually. I gently shook my head. Not at all. Not going to happen. It wouldn't be wise. Negative. I engaged a contractor who assembled a crew of large, unemployed coal miners to connect 3 buildings in a linear fashion. The cabin, measuring 16 by 16, would be positioned at the center. On one hand, I envisioned a barn that measured 16 feet deep and 32 feet wide for my equipment. On the other side, I had them assemble a 16 feet by 16 feet indoor wooden shed. What's the reason for 16-foot lengths? The price for the 10 by 10 beams from the sawmill was the lowest I could find. He vowed to have everything constructed and protected from the elements before the initial snowfall arrived. Now, that could be a month or less away, so he had quite the challenge ahead of him. Fortunately, he was equipped with truck-mounted compressors and powerful air drills. I convinced him to apply a line of construction adhesive between each layer as the logs were stacked. I made a quick stop at a Home Depot to pick up some large canvas tarps and crafted a marquee, or box tent, by sewing them together. I cleared away the trees and debris to one side of the building site and set up the tent for shelter. Accommodations are overly priced. I ordered the building timbers along with 40 landscaping timbers, each measuring 10 feet in length. I intended to hold off until the construction was complete, then arrange 2 rows of sleepers and position the remaining ones across them to create the floor for a porch I envisioned building the next spring. It would spare me from the muck. I held on to hope. I set them apart with the width of a carpenter's pencil, then carefully drilled them out and secured them in position. The task was challenging, yet progress felt painfully slow. My shoulders adapted to the task, providing me with a productive outlet. Before that, however, once the contractor's crew completed the walls and roof, I had 2 man-sized doors installed along with a barn door for the tractor and implements. I utilized the chainsaw to create openings for the framed windows, followed by securing flatboards to the beams to ensure proper alignment. The 2 windows in the barn and the 2 in the cabin added a welcoming touch. I purchased a gasoline-powered spray painter. Initially, I poured pure bleach into it to disinfect the cave. I needed to pause and don a damp coverall, hair cover, and a moist face mask. The bleach was suffocating my breath. I applied a couple of coats of white outdoor paint to the cave, the cabin, the wood house, and the machine shed, covering all interior surfaces that weren't glass. I made sure to thoroughly clean that paint sprayer. It's unwise to allow anything to be squandered due to poor oversight. The ancient maps preserved by the county reveal that the mountain once featured a winding road or track that coiled its way upward, ultimately leading to a small plateau at its summit. It required considerable effort to identify the shared elements between the purchased photocopy and the on-site specifics. Once I discovered a shared connection, I began igniting trees as I came across the relatively even path. More than 5 decades had yielded some truly lovely trees, even amidst the compacted roadway. I raced through the first mile or so. By that time, the paint fumes had cleared from inside. I transferred the belongings from my van into the cave. I required cupboards, shelves, counters, and bookcases. These were one-time startup costs, so I didn't complain too much about the expense. That was before I noticed the prices. Suddenly, an eerie sensation crept over me, causing the hair on the back of my neck to rise. I evaluated the cost of furniture alongside hardwood boards, a generator, a drill, a power saw, and a router. After that, I stepped outside once more to examine the trees I had designated for cutting down. There were plenty of beautiful hardwoods out there, Bubba. I ventured out to the sawmill, hoping to negotiate a favorable arrangement. He possessed cutoffs and slabs that he processed and sold as sawdust to the county, albeit at a loss. I struck an agreement with him to dispatch a crew to cut and remove the quality timber, along with extracting the stumps. In return, he would occasionally sell me some quality gray-dried boards and provide me with his slabs and cutoffs for my cook stove. We both came away with quite the haul. I had oak, ash, walnut, and hickory in that space. A few of them measured 16 inches across. He wished to behold the trees prior to giving his consent, wondering if I might be leading him on. Negative. I have a strong feeling that I made it onto his Christmas list for a fine bottle of bourbon that day. Before long, a steady stream of trucks arrived, each loaded with dried cutoffs and slabs. It completely filled the firewood cabin and spilled into half the living cabin before I had to tell him to stop. His crew toiled from the break of day until nightfall, hauling timber and yanking stumps with a Cat D4. They ventured 1.5 miles down the trail before he found himself with no more space for his trophies. I acquired a compact 8 kilowatts generator equipped with dual mufflers, along with a selection of power tools. The sole additional items I purchased were glue, fluted pegs, wax, varnish, and lemon oil. Oh, I required drawer glides, knobs, and similar items, but those were just minor details. Before long, I found myself preparing bread and biscuits, soups and stews on that trusty old 2-eye stove. I had come to understand that the water flowing down the hole nourished the red bush field. That gave me confidence that utilizing it for an outhouse wouldn't harm me or anyone else. That channel created an excellent atmosphere for a relaxing soak, but I needed to transition to safer soaps. I held on to my trash for those rare occasions when I ventured into town for laundry, meat, and fuel for the generator. The fluorescent light I installed above my workbench for woodworking revealed just how much I longed for modern lighting in the cave. I pondered deeply on the best approach to bring lighting into that space. At last, I discovered it. How did vacation trailers maintain food freshness and ensure the lights were operational? Propane. I ventured into town to verify my bank balance and to explore the costs associated with a 2-burner propane setup, including a refrigerator freezer and a hefty 1,000-pound tank. Propane cost approximately $1 per pound, or slightly less when purchased in larger quantities. I made the choice to invest in it. If I lacked sufficient funds to fill the tank, then I simply wouldn't do it. Uncomplicated. Warm water continued to flow directly from the rocks. Following the freeze, I acquired a frame for a cart and then meticulously constructed a box to fit it. I transported all the stumps back to the cabin and began the task of splitting them into pieces that would fit into the stove. They would smolder almost like coal during the lengthy, frigid nights of winter. That winter, we experienced several instances of flash freezes and thundersnow, conditions that would have rendered any attempt to leave the mountain utterly impossible without the assistance of the tractor and dozer blade. I harvested a few deer, processed them, and transported them into town for the butcher to prepare and package for me. The sheriff must have informed him that I was cleared to hunt for meat, as he greeted me with a broad smile when I stopped by to collect the frozen, wrapped product. I inquired whether he would have a demand for bear meat in the spring, and they responded accordingly. I had spotted some large berry patches, and surely, there would be some foolish creatures swimming through the blackberries. I possessed a chain and a tractor that could tackle nearly any issue, except for a grizzly after I had taken my shot. When I inquired with a gentleman about how to begin a garden, he directed me towards the U.S. The catalog of the government printing office. My large, shiny new mailbox has been filled several times. They didn't ask for much, but the quality of the paper was certainly lacking. A fellow patron at the library introduced me to a spray designed for preserving newsprint. I was in business. I crafted a glass-fronted bookcase for the small pamphlets to safeguard them from bugs and humidity. The warm water that flowed continuously maintained a pleasant level of humidity throughout the winter, yet it became excessively high in the spring and summer months. As spring arrived, the crew from the sawmill returned to gather another batch. I sensed that I was at a disadvantage in that arrangement, so I decided to pay the owner a visit. I was correct. He was raking in profits for top-notch hardwood that had been untouched for more than half a century. Uncle never got around to harvesting it. Certain pieces dated back 80 to 90 years. I had a sense of his earnings when he proposed to deposit $100,000 into my bank account. My goodness, my lord. If that was his compensation, what was he producing? I requested $200,000 for each filled kiln, as once it was gone, I wouldn't have the opportunity to do it again, and I required some means of support until my time came. He grasped the situation, and we sealed the agreement with a handshake. He must have been earning 3 or 4 times what he compensated me. He lacked the necessary determination. I secured $400,000 for 2 years of top-tier logging. I discovered later that the majority of what he collected were logs of veneer quality. There was so much more beyond. It simply wasn't situated on the roadbed. I would need to enclose the area, mark it clearly, and install barriers like tank traps along the roads to deter any timber thieves. I might not be able to handle a cat, but I can definitely manage a logging truck or a log skidder. That year, my income tax was quite unpleasant. I felt quite discontented. I discovered a bar with an authentic bartender, not just some flashy server. Whenever I visited town, I would swing by for a couple of beers and indulge in a pork tenderloin sandwich. The guys in the back would get a bit unruly from time to time, but it didn't bother me at all. They had a collection of bikes in the back and enjoyed their music at a high volume, yet they were decent lads. I recognized the signs immediately, and they clearly weren't partaking. On that specific day, I observed a man seated by himself at a table, a half-consumed, largely neglected beer beside him. He donned worn shop blues and sturdy steel-toed boots. He brought back memories of my own reflection from a decade ago, prompting me to pull up a chair and discover what was causing him such distress. "What do you have for me, my friend?" "Meh. The press sheet feed is completely ineffective. I'm ready to take the plunge and accept the consequences." "I understand, my friend. At times, the heavy feeders fail to maintain registration due to a lack of foresight in feeding half-inch stock through them." I examined his troublesome creation. Indeed, sat in his hot seat. "By golly, you can count on me for this. Rotate it 20 degrees to the left, then 20 degrees to the right once it's positioned on the punch table. That will refresh the corners, and you'll be soaring." He regarded me as if I had just committed the most egregious faux pas imaginable. "I understand. It's foolish. How often have you heard that if something seems foolish but gets results, it can't really be considered foolish?" He began at a leisurely pace, but by the moment he reached the door, he had shifted into high gear. A smile spread across my face. It was a satisfying experience. By the summer of my second year, I felt a deeper connection to the neighborhood. Indeed, I caused quite a stir among many women when I expressed my preference for engaging solely with men in my business dealings. Yet, that was my own cursed decision. If anyone disagrees with me, then they can take a hike. Even after taxes, I found myself with more than $280,000 in the bank. I purchased an 8-day chiming mantle clock because the silence of the cave could be quite unsettling at times. A new, cozy chair adorned my small living room, and I introduced a larger carpet pad along with several braided rugs, ensuring that strolling around barefoot became a delightful experience. My van was experiencing some engine troubles. I decided it was best to eliminate it before things spiraled further. I exchanged it for a Chevy S10 four-wheel drive crew cab pickup, which would navigate the mountain roads in winter with far less fuss than that cargo van ever managed. I began to explore new places more frequently. Once a month, I made the journey to Hazard to explore a bookstore there. I gathered a collection of empty journals to begin documenting my past. It evolved into a personal narrative. The season was deep into winter's embrace. As I immersed myself in the delightful task of planting my spring garden, the news arrived unexpectedly. My parents lost their lives in a tragic accident at a signal crossing that had malfunctioned, struck by a train. There was no forewarning. Hope was a distant memory for them. A commuter train soared through the air, tragically ending lives in its path. I gathered my belongings, secured the house, and made my way north for the wake and funeral. I was quite displeased with the Burlington Northern Railroad and published a full-page critique in the Chicago Tribune condemning their maintenance policy in high-traffic areas. Assisted by a librarian, I delved into the statistics of railroad-related accidents and fatalities over the last 2 decades and created a graph to illustrate the findings. It was quite condemning. That was published as well. An old union representative paid me a visit, requesting that I settle the matter once and for all. I informed the fool that once negligent homicide came into play, there were no rules left to follow. When it was family that was lost, it felt even more profound. He departed with the understanding that my demeanor was sharp and my resolve unyielding. Before too much time passed, I was visited by 2 attorneys, acting on behalf of the railroad. What would it take for me to cease my relentless criticism of them? Uncomplicated. Invest $10 million in me and establish a preventative maintenance schedule for all city and suburban crossings, then announce it in the newspaper. I had stirred up quite a frenzy among the local watchdog press regarding the topic. They would oversee the planned visits and criticize any shortcomings in adhering to their timetable. An agreement was established between us. I laid my dear parents to rest, believing that such a tragedy should not occur again for many years to come. The attorney representing my parents reached out to me for a reading of their will. As their sole offspring, the entire estate was passed down to me. My emotions were a mix of nostalgia and sadness as I explored the house. I gathered some keepsakes and a photo album to bring along. The remainder was donated to AmVets, and the home of my childhood was listed for sale. It was sold in a fairly quick time frame. In the course of the month, the check from the railroad was delivered by a secured courier. I must admit, I was taken aback that it arrived without any postage due. I divided the funds among various banks to adhere to the $250,000 FDIC limits on institutional liability. After returning to Kentucky, I invested everything into infrastructure improvement bonds and other municipal bonds to generate more income. I never found myself taking risks in the stock market or in the agricultural futures markets. Bonds are reliable financial instruments that offer a prioritized return in the case of a default by the issuing business or corporation. Well, I found myself with some cash. It didn't prevent me from embodying Mr. Doom and gloom too much. I arranged for the contractor to bring his team to construct a smokehouse, meticulously crafted 10 by 10, matching the architectural style of the other buildings. The berries were on the verge of ripening. I tidied the path surrounding the mountain, or at least what remained after the timber had been taken. I removed the shrubbery and other undergrowth that had emerged on the road bed, then utilized the tractor's blade to level and smooth everything out. At the end of the road, I left behind everything except for a narrow, hidden trail. I then had a gate put in at the road and marked the area with signs stating, "No hunting, no trespassing." I had another gate put in 10 feet up my usual road to the cabin, allowing me to pull off the highway before getting out to unlock or lock it. Drivers in that area hardly reduced their speed unless absolutely necessary. Speed limit signs were regarded as mere recommendations for the minimum speed. Mobile devices were ineffective in the vicinity of the mountain. Moreover, once I was inside, how was I supposed to receive a signal? I purchased a voice-activated phone for emergency services, specifically designed for maritime use. The range was approximately 28 miles. With a small spade and ample patience, I interred a few lines between the gate and led them into the cave. I went through 3 hammer drill bits trying to get through that stubborn rock. I installed a phone at the gate within a weatherproof box, with the other end secured to the wall close to the cave's exit outside. I had a small crank magneto set up by each phone to sound a bell at both locations. If not, I would remain unaware of anyone's desire to engage in conversation with me. I found it to be a rather sophisticated approach to manage my affairs while preserving my confidentiality. If I desired solitude, I could simply turn off the circuits. I harvested 2 deer and 3 black bears that spring. The tractor, chain, and karcher certainly simplified the process of extracting the bodies from the woods, making it far less complicated than it might have been. The weight of those black bears surpassed mine. I undertook some primal butchering by myself, hung the meat, and smoked it. I felled a large hickory tree and removed the bark from my smokehouse. Because I hot smoked the meat, I didn't need to add much salt. I certainly wasn't going to attempt tanning those skins by myself. However, I discovered someone who can handle it for me. During that summer and autumn, I charted and delineated the path as it ascended and wound around the mountain. I discovered a few quaint little streams, some neglected tiny fields, and more than one charming small cave. I discovered the point where it approached nearest to the cabin and marked a path to it. Before the earth succumbed to frost, I ensured it was cleared. Given that my cabin was situated quite high on the mountain, reaching the summit was not a significant challenge, so I took the initiative to clear the remaining trail to allow the tractor access. I wasn't foolish, however. The finest tree trunks were set aside for the foresters to transport to the mill. After finishing the cutting, I called them to come and collect the logs while they were still fresh. I found that the remainder of the trail truly culminated at a plateau. It seemed that, at some point, the area had been prepared to serve as a grain or cornfield. The land appeared to lack fertility, remaining quite desolate even after many years of being left untouched. I assumed that the rains had likely carried away much of the organic material down the slopes. I embarked on the extensive journey of rejuvenating the soil. I employed the blade on the tractor to create small retention dams along the edges. I acquired a wood chipper and moved substantial heaps of timber and debris from tree topping to the field, processed them through the chipper, and then shielded the resulting mounds with black plastic to encourage decomposition. I recalled coming across information regarding the enhancement of long-term yields in fields through the incorporation of charcoal into the soil. A substantial amount of charcoal. Raw charcoal is quite affordable if you're willing to overlook the charcoal burner's errors with wood sinters. Everything functions perfectly after being processed through the chipper. I needed to cover the chipper's exit with canvas to prevent the dust from swirling around. The outcomes of that were thoroughly integrated into the soil, courtesy of a rotary tiller I purchased for the tractor. During my time up there, I contemplated my plans for that land. This was destined to be my orchard. From that point forward, I cultivated the land in sections to align with my envisioned rows of trees. I anticipated that I would be planting trees in 2 springs. After allowing the compost piles a year to break down, the initial flurries arrived. I arranged for the propane tank to be refilled and contacted the yard for another delivery of dry log slabs and cutoffs for the stove. It required a few challenging days of effort to move the pile inside and stack it, but the sight of the completed ricks was incredibly rewarding. Once more, I divided the stumps that I pulled from the earth using the tractor. The space in my machine shed was becoming quite cramped. There wasn't much space left for me to engage in projects in that place anymore. I considered increasing its size significantly, extending its depth and length. I reached out to my contractor. He mentioned that the winter was sufficiently mild to complete the task during that season. He needed the building to be vacant in order to proceed with his work. He had to excavate the soil floor and install footings, followed by layers of sand and gravel. I purchased a truckload of large tarps, transported all the gear to line the road leading to the trail, and draped them over the equipment. I understood that the diesel-powered tractor would be a real challenge to start when the temperatures dropped below freezing. I arranged for the implement dealer to send a mechanic to install a block heater that I could connect to my small generator. I arranged for my fuel vendor to come and pump out my tanks, replacing the diesel with a cold temperature mix to prevent it from gelling in temperatures around 10 below zero. It simply didn't reach that level of chill in that area. When the moment arrived, I would be prepared. As he was focused on the machine shed, I had him finish up my front porch. At a depth of 10 feet, it created a pleasant spot to relax and observe the changing weather. The substantial posts at the corners and the sturdy beam that formed the overhang created a sense of warmth and comfort. Upon seeing the layout, I instructed him to construct a half wall encircling the area, leaving only the space in front of the cabin door open before I let him proceed on his own. I ordered a large cast iron hibachi to provide warmth during my outdoor moments. Edited. Clarification. Lodge produces a variety of cast iron cookware, including Dutch ovens, fry pans, and more. It still required sturdy, warm boots and a well-insulated coverall to endure the time spent out there. The winter winds howl fiercely, swirling high among the rugged peaks of the mountains. As the snow begins to fall, you can truly feel its presence, with each tiny flake delivering a sharp kiss against your skin. The season of renewal was approaching. The moment had arrived to ponder the idea of a garden once more. I stumbled upon a quaint field, basking in the sun, nestled lower on the mountain. A small stream flowed nearby, ensuring that water was never a concern. I could clear the area while it was still chilly, but removing the stumps would need to be postponed until the ground warmed up. I would certainly need to purchase a few loads of composted manure since I didn't have any proper fertilizer on hand. I did have that rotary tiller, which would certainly simplify the task of incorporating it. I had spent nearly 5 years there. The moment had arrived to sow the seeds of my garden. I organized my garden with root crops such as potatoes, onions, garlic, and carrots, along with cabbage and cucumbers for pickling, as well as tomatoes and melons, since that was the purpose of the garden. I also desired multiple rows of sweet corn. Few things can compare to tomatoes still warm from the sun or sweet corn that was picked just moments before being plunged into boiling water or grilled over charcoal. I cultivated a half row of hot peppers alongside a half row of horseradish to explore the possibilities they might offer. I cultivated some celery root, also known as celeriac, along with bunch celery. I'm a big fan of celery paired with peanut butter or cream cheese. That brought something to mind. I could indulge a little without worry. I've placed an order for a sturdy Weber kettle and also decided to get some charcoal mixed with wood from the same supplier I used previously. I mentioned it was for my barbecue grill, and he immediately showed interest. Here he was, grappling with the dilemma of what to do with his unsuccessful attempts. I introduced him to an entirely new market. He brought me 200 pounds at no cost. I needed to purchase some boards and assemble a container to keep everything organized. Following that, I began to notice 50-pound bags of locally produced grilled charcoal available at the neighborhood liquor stores for $25 each. It seems he likely ascended to a higher tax bracket that year. The hides returned from the tanner. He truly specialized in trophy mounts for a living. He was a taxidermist, and tanning skins was just part of the craft. He billed me just shy of $1,000 to tan 3 bearskins and 2 deer. Given the scale and effort required to tan those bearskins, even without the heads and paws, I felt I had struck a good bargain. I provided him with the opportunity to explore and potentially earn some income. The contractor has completed my machine shed. He even installed a mobile crane on a large overhead beam. I finally managed to secure a spot for my truck indoors, sheltered from the elements. I created an opening in the wall for the generator exhaust and installed the mufflers on the exterior. It was positioned awkwardly, so I constructed a sturdy skid from beams that I cut using my chainsaw. I purchased a box fan for the shop and requested my fuel supplier to include a 100-gallon tank of gasoline with my order. I had grown weary of moving jerry cans of fuel back and forth. One morning, I awoke to a strange hissing sound emanating from the stovepipe, a telltale sign that it was either snowing or sleeting outside. I stoked the fire for coffee and ventured out to collect a pile of firewood for the rack by the stove. The sleet transformed into ice upon impact, a chilling spectacle to behold. The ground was coated with more than an inch of ice, and the wind was howling through the air. I was just about to carry a full armload when a noise caught my attention from the corner of the cabin. I glanced over to find a man huddled, seeking warmth. I swiftly set down the wood, scooped him up, and brought him indoors, where I hurriedly undressed him and placed him in the warm water. His outer garments were encased in ice, while his inner layers were drenched. He was having some difficulty breathing at that moment. I draped his clothes by the stove to thaw and dry, then stepped outside to gather a few loads of wood. I've been eager to heat up that cave sauna for some time now. This fellow had come perilously close to death and was still not in the clear. Once I finished 6 loads, I shut the door, prepared the stove, and adjusted the dampers. Before long, the stove was blazing, radiating warmth along the back. I wished that it would remain intact and not succumb to any damage. I had never experienced such heat before. It remained intact, yet I noticed a considerable amount of pinging from the shattered firebrick. I would need to reline it when I get the chance. I found myself drenched in perspiration, with noticeable rings forming beneath my arms on my shirt. I stripped down to my trousers. The man was improving. In the meantime, my unfortunate coffee pot had completely boiled dry. I let out a snort and topped it off, then placed it back on the stove in the coolest corner, right at the front. My guest had settled down and drifted into a peaceful slumber. I left him in his place, as there was no harm he could cause other than slipping away and meeting his own end beneath the surface. I eased off the dampers, brewed a cup of coffee, and settled in to read through some of my government printing office pamphlets. As the clock struck noon, I prepared a sandwich, took a moment to stretch, and gazed out the window to observe the day's weather. The sleet had ceased, yet the wind intensified, and the temperature continued to drop. I certainly wasn't planning on heading to town anytime soon. I had no use for any weather updates, and the news held no appeal for me whatsoever. Often, the weather reports I encountered bore little resemblance to the actual conditions on the mountain. I gathered a bundle of wood simply because I was present and made my way back indoors. I set a bear roast to cook over the fire for dinner and drifted off in my chair for a couple of hours. My guest stirred from sleep around 4. I helped him get up and dried him off with a towel, then put him in some of my sweatpants. I poured him a couple of cups of hot, sweet coffee and listened to his story unfold. The reckless individual had dismissed the sleet warnings and ventured out for a morning hunt just before dawn. He was merely a young student, still navigating the halls of high school, unaware of the complexities that lay ahead. Nonetheless, I laid down the law, explaining to him that he not only put himself at risk, but also jeopardized anyone who might have been dispatched to search for him. Ultimately, I reviewed some fundamental outdoor skills that I had learned, including how to ignite a fire in damp conditions and essential items to bring along, strategies for survival, using a tarp and cord during inclement weather, quick meal options for when it mattered most, and what to pack for a fast, warming cup of tea when the chill set in. Opting for an ultralight approach, the total value of the items was perhaps around $200. Picking up a tarp from the hardware store along with an Army surplus map case cost around $40. He disregarded my signs prohibiting hunting and trespassing. For dinner, we enjoyed potatoes cooked in their skins, stewed tomatoes, and smoked bear roast. He was still in shock, so I sent him to bed while I took care of the dishes and tidied up. I rested atop 2 bear skins, with one beneath me, its first side turned downwards. I had a wonderfully restful sleep. In the early hours, my visitor, Mark, inquired about the location of the outhouse. I showcased my actions by relieving myself in the small flume that he had prepared the day before. His expression was one of shock until I explained that I had discovered the outflow was intended to nourish the red bush field, and that a bit of fertilizer would actually benefit them. I realized that toilet paper was unnecessary for me. I simply cleaned with my hand and then dried myself off afterward. Additionally, the use of toilet paper may have gradually obstructed the seams in the rock. And then what would my situation be? In a tough spot, that's where. By noon, the temperature had risen again, a common occurrence in the mountains during springtime. The ice had vanished, lingering only in the shaded areas. I had him put on his clothes, which were nice and dry by that time. Though his boots were somewhat damp, that was a concern solely for him. Before we departed, I delivered another stern lecture to him. If you so much as breathe a word to anyone about this cave, you might as well start saying your prayers, because the moment I catch wind of a caveman, I will be coming for you. The final sight that will greet your eyes is a shovel brimming with earth, enveloping your face as I entomb you in darkness. If you believe I can't or won't accomplish this, you better reconsider, my friend. I reside atop this mountain to distance myself from others, ensuring I don't harm anyone once more. He fell for it completely. He was on the verge of losing control while standing there. I retrieved the truck and drove him into town. I chose not to visit his home. Alas, I brought him to the sheriff's station, and right there in front of a deputy, I laid down the law once more. You foolish individual. If you dare to venture into the woods again without first completing a safety and survival course, I assure you, the consequences will be severe. Should you ever attempt to hunt on my mountain again without my consent, I suggest you ensure your affairs are in order. I seek provisions for my pantry, armed with a Garand M1. Firearms of that caliber claimed countless lives during World War II, and taking one more won't make a difference. I have plenty of woods and a shovel, but I assure you, I won't be eating you. That stays with you. I acknowledged the deputy and walked away, watching him furiously nod his head like a small doll in the back window of a car with worn-out springs. I trust that he accepted what was said as absolute truth. He would remain oblivious to the narrow escape from death he experienced that morning. I paused at the bar to enjoy a beer and a sandwich. I had completed my act of kindness for the day. I shared with the bartender the ridiculous antics of Mark and how narrowly he escaped a serious mishap during the sleet storm. I wished he would face some consequences for it a few times, so that what I said might resonate more effectively. Social shaming was more likely to pierce his ego than receiving criticism from a single individual. Regardless of my position of authority, I truly relished his pork tenderloin sandwich. Delicious, chilled brew and sizzling, crispy pork bites. It's a challenging mix to overcome. I strolled around to catch a glimpse of what the guys were up to. The pool tables were bustling with activity. A voice rang out from the crowd. "Excuse me, are you the person who resides on that mountain?" "Indeed. I suppose my reputation has a way of getting ahead of me. What brings you to live in solitude up there?" "To be frank, so I don't become enraged and harm someone." A fellow sporting a small panda bear tattooed high on his arm asked, "Were you ever in the forces?" "Nope. Resided in Cicero." A slender black man shouted, "That'll do it," and exchanged a high five with his neighbor. I smiled and treated the whole place to a round. At that point, the darkness was beginning to settle in. I made my way home, content and with a satisfied appetite. The sky was nearing twilight as I arrived at the gate. I opened it with my headlights. I drove into the machine shed, switched off the engine, shut my eyes, and let myself unwind. I found myself at home. Secure. I inhaled deeply, stepped out of the truck, shut its door along with the sheds, and entered inside. By that time, gathering an armful of split stumps had become a deeply rooted routine. I partially filled the stove and adjusted the damper before undressing and enjoying a bath. I utilized Dr. Bronner's peppermint soap. Honestly, I had used it as toothpaste before without any negative consequences. That summer, I purchased a case of it after running low on glycerin bar soap, and I found it to be quite satisfying. I dismissed all the religious messages that adorned the bottles. The quality of the soap remained unchanged. As I reclined, it dawned on me that I had a certain longing for the sight of a flickering fire. If I recalled in the morning, I would jot down a reminder to check for a small Franklin stove with a window, or perhaps a compact kerosene or diesel fireplace heater like the ones I had observed on a ship. The following day, I ventured into danger to pay a visit to the library. The fireplace lingered in my mind, haunting my dreams and greeting me as the first thought of the morning. I discovered a quaint diner where I could place my order straight with the cook, instead of dealing with a boisterous waitress who seemed determined to mess up my requests. He really excelled in preparing cottage fries, bacon, and eggs. I consistently praised his efforts and generously rewarded him with a substantial gratuity. I indulged in a little shopping prior to the library's opening, but I made sure to be present for the opening bell as the clock struck 10. I plunged into the depths of the internet with fervor. When I finally stumbled upon the Dickinson website, I was amazed by the heaters and propane stoves. I took extensive notes. Their heaters had a certain appeal, yet the necessity for a booster fan rendered them unsuitable. After that, I researched Franklin stoves and discovered a number of different variations on the concept. Some featured an open design, while others had glass fronts and swing-away doors. Once more, I observed the various models, manufacturers, and their respective prices. I contemplated hoses, regulators, and ventilation. Interesting. I already possessed a master chimney pipe. I had to take it for granted that the stove pipe could be substituted into it. I would like to meet with my amicable contractor. I had no intention of tampering with gas fittings on my own. I wasn't truly fearful, merely inexperienced and cautious. After witnessing it executed correctly, I would feel empowered to take it on independently. I had been contemplating the idea of another gas light descending like a chandelier above the table. My contractor had a gas specialist who would procure the parts and handle the work. He could replace the glass-fronted Franklin with the two-eyed stove, relocate it to the machine shed for me, and install the vent pipe outside. If I had him request the right Franklin, it would ensure the space stays warm enough and feature a firebox spacious enough to hold the split roots I utilized overnight during the bitter cold. After the components arrived, I lingered to absorb the knowledge. Instead of looming over the man and causing him anxiety, I offered him $100 to engage in conversation while he worked, turning it into a learning experience. I broadened the job scope slightly. A master gas valve for the interior had not been included in the initial installation. He took care of that immediately. Rather than employing tin snips and pop rivets, he opted for a Y fitting to connect with an existing chimney section. He questioned, why exert more effort than necessary? I was fairly certain that he was smarter than I was. Unwell. Due to the extruded copper composition of the gas line, the use of compression joints was not feasible. All components needed to be brazed since the compression joints exhibited slight permeability to pressurized gases. I could expertly cut and braze copper lines with remarkable skill. I utilized a notably deep fissure in the cave ceiling to conceal the gas feeder pipe. Holes were re-drilled and secured with lead slugs to stabilize the pipe and provide support for the downshaft of the gas light. Uncertain of the rock ceiling's fragility, I proceeded with the drilling at a measured pace, opting not to employ a star drill with a hammer or a hammer drill. Everything remained intact, boosting my confidence in the situation. A quick application of matte white spray paint concealed the line perfectly. Ultimately, I discovered that the stove needed a 12-volt line for the thermostat. Well, I connected a 12-volt line through the same hole used for the gas line from the machine shed, linking it to a 12-volt battery that was in turn connected to the generator's 12-volt regulated connection. Honestly, I felt a surge of energy at the thought of being pulled, resisting all the way into the 1880s. The existence of that 12-volt line would later render the choice to operate a fan indoors during the summer much more agreeable. No one with a sound mind appreciates disposable batteries. A fan that runs on batteries for daily use simply doesn't sit right. Initially, it felt peculiar to turn on the burner instead of tending to the firebox, and I had to adjust to the routine of rekindling the flames each time I wanted to use the Franklin, rather than simply reviving the heat from the smoldering coals. The coals always appeared to burn out quickly, likely due to the shaker grate positioned beneath the firebox. I thought about placing firebrick over a third or half of the bottom to support a coal bed, but I never got around to it. Instead, I crafted fire starters using repurposed canning wax, paper egg cartons, and some fluffy cedar bark that I processed through the chipper multiple times, which I kept collecting in a gunny sack. It had a bit of a rustic charm, but it got the job done. I acquired a robust bandsaw featuring a cast iron base and a premium, effortlessly gliding fence. I made a tweak to the screw feed adjustment and began cutting thin panels of hickory, cedar, maple, walnut, and ash. I chose boards measuring 1x4-3x8 inches in thickness. If I made them much thinner, the boards would break in my hands while I was cutting dovetails or finishing the wood. A steel dovetail template paired with a selection of vertical milling bits transformed my router table into a precision dovetail machine. I needed to tidy up the edges using a jeweler's saw. However, I completed the boards prior to putting together the boxes. I placed them on a sticky rubber sheet and utilized a palm sander to refine the boards, followed by an eccentric palm buffer to enhance the surfaces, and concluded with a hand polish using carnauba wax. I was astonished by how impressive everything appeared. I employed small fillets of quarter-round ash, carefully glued into the corners to enhance the strength of the joints. Instead of using latches, I opted to glue in small blocks with urethane glue, allowing the lids to slip fit with an interrupted piano hinge at the back. I was able to create 1 to 2 pieces each day and sold them to a furniture store in Hazard. They served as an excellent project for a rainy day, allowing me to indulge in the pleasure of working with my hands. Otherwise, I would never have become a tool and die man. I crafted some woven cedar inserts using pencil-wide wood, cut to just under 1/8 of an inch thick. As soon as the weather cleared up, I had the stumps removed from my garden. I nearly got the tractor stuck all the way up to the axles. That would have been quite a challenge to extract. It's quite mortifying as well. I had placed a pre-order for the composted cow pies. Once it had dried sufficiently, I arranged for its delivery and began the process of incorporating it into the soil using a 6-foot-wide rototiller that penetrated 2 feet beneath the surface. It appeared magnificent once I completed it. I placed the seeds and then draped my collection of tarps over them for a few days, allowing the sun to warm the soil and retain the moisture effectively. As soon as I lifted the tarp and spotted the seedlings, I removed the coverings. Then I found myself on bird and critter duty, armed with my .22 Magnum and a small .410 shotgun that I had purchased that spring. There I was, content and carefree, lounging in my little lawn chair with that .410 resting in my lap. A crow descended and began its midday feast. I sent that wretched bird flying from its perch. Poor decision. I caused more harm to the garden with that .410 than the bird ever could have. Oh no. That's when I discovered the art of getting low and gliding past the birds, rather than attempting to hide the rascals where they perched. I managed to catch that pesky crow. After all, I spent my mornings and evenings out there. It's astonishing that anything survived with all the rabbits, raccoons, and porcupines I took down. For every person I captured, it seemed there were 2 more patiently awaiting their moment. What about deer? Oh my goodness. It seems there was likely a deer publication circulating that announced, "Clueless farmer cultivates garden," complete with the exact coordinates. In just a week, I delivered my 4th load of gutted deer carcasses to the butcher, then made my way to the pound to adopt the 2 largest dogs that approached me. They were known as Andy and Sophie. Sophie had been spayed, ensuring there would be no puppies in the future. Subsequently, I procured several sacks of dry dog food, some dishes, gunny sacks, and a couple of bales of hay. I constructed 2 dog houses side by side. Their food dishes and water bowls were placed on the porch. Can you believe it? They rested on the porch. I surrendered and relocated their stuffed gunny sacks to their sleeping area. They wreaked havoc on the garden creatures. I was pleased that they weren't pups and were instead country dogs. They had learned about porcupines through a difficult experience. Their barking signaled me to step outside and take aim at any spotted porkies with my rifle. The initial 4 deer carcasses were skinned, quartered, divided into muscle groups, and hung to smoke. There wasn't sufficient space to hang or freeze all the meat I received from the butcher. I saved a couple of tenderloins, and that was all. The butcher mentioned he would accept the remainder on credit since he had a steady demand for venison. A fine gentleman. I inquired about his thoughts on bear meat. He replied with, "Bring it on." As soon as the berries arrived, my pickup bed really got put to the test. I successfully harvested 8 black bears. 4 were large figures, both maternal and paternal. The others appeared to be smaller, likely just yearlings. I arranged for the deer and bear skins to be tanned by the taxidermist. He sought a few deer skins for his creative endeavors. It lowered my bill to some extent. It seems that the unfortunate butcher was slicing through bear carcasses even in his dreams. Strangely, the very first produced to mature in the garden was the radishes. The compost enhanced their sweetness. Before long, the solitary hill of summer squash yielded its bounty. Then we were off and running. I purchased jars for canning, along with lids and a complete canning kit. I constructed a robust set of shelves at the back of the wood shed, positioned against the mountain's rock face. That turned into my cellar. I purchased a mail-order turkey deep-frying setup from Cabela's, which included a robust cast-iron propane burner. I connected that to a 20-pound tank and arranged a sturdy table on the porch to serve as my workstation. I employed masking tape and a grease pencil to meticulously label each jar. I was completely unaware of the duration for which I would be holding onto those items. I delved into canning by exploring those pamphlets from the government printing office. Did you know that you can butter, celery, meat? I felt relieved after reading that guide since I was completely unaware of what I was about to face. Some I didn't need to can to reap the benefits from. There was a seasoned bachelor living next door, Alistair. He tended to chickens, turkeys, and ducks. He earned his livelihood through Social Security and the proceeds from his egg sales. His back could no longer endure the labor required to maintain a garden. I exchanged some fresh produce for chickens, turkeys, and eggs. He was absolutely thrilled as his birds provided a sustainable source, and he enjoyed a more diverse diet. He valued some of the canned goods for later in the year as well. I received my Thanksgiving turkey from him. He was quite fond of indulging in a bit of bear meat or venison from time to time. After the first frost, I accidentally let over 100 pounds of potatoes fall on him. His only remark was, "Now where on earth am I meant to place all these?" I couldn't help but burst into laughter. I only handed him perhaps a fraction of what I uncovered. Exactly as it is. I found myself pondering that very question. Throughout the winter, I made it a point to visit him weekly to ensure he was doing well. After his vintage 1963 Chevy pickup gave out, I arranged for it to be towed, had the drivetrain completely rebuilt, installed new brakes, and upgraded the tires. When he inquired about what transpired, I simply replied that I had done a bit of work on it in my shop and advised him to disregard it. He must have noticed the significant changes the moment he engaged the clutch and shifted into gear, yet he honored my request and kept silent about it. I held on to the hope that he would outlive me, as the thought of his name etched on a headstone was something I could never bear to face. My old truck was revealing the passage of time. The front bearings were failing, and the brakes were on the verge of complete failure. It became excessively hot. I had no intention of wasting money on it. I intended to swap it out. I was reluctant to purchase yet another unreliable gadget. I contemplated Alistair's worn-out vehicle. It featured plugs, points, and a choke. I found that enjoyable. I grabbed a Hemmings Motor News and searched for a classic rebuilt pickup truck. Upon seeing the ad, a smile naturally spread across my face. It was precisely what I had been seeking. A classic 1961 Chevy Apache pickup featuring a straight 6 engine and a 4-speed manual transmission. The engine and transmission had undergone a complete overhaul. It featured a fresh clutch and brakes. The differential was completely stripped down and reconstructed from the ground up. It was even reupholstered and fitted with new glass. I placed a call, organized the payment, and coordinated with motor shippers to handle it for me. The delivery service arrived at my cabin, collected my check, carefully maneuvered the vehicle off the ramp, took my old pickup, and then presented me with the title and keys. I removed the plates from my lifeless truck and headed into town, now the proud owner of a brown over cream long bed pickup nearly as old as I am. I completed the tax payments, transferred the title, acquired new plates, and made my way to the insurance broker. The policy came with a hefty price tag due to its antique nature. That just jogged my memory. I had been navigating life without insurance. I secured coverage for my property and enrolled in a health insurance plan. The sound of relief. I thought it might be worthwhile if I found myself in the hospital, but aside from that, it was a bureaucratic mess crafted to create busy work for the uninspired. During my time in town, I delivered the title to my former truck to the dealer who accepted it, enjoyed my pork tenderloin and Sam Adams at the bar, and then collected 40 pounds of assorted beef and pork from the butcher, all neatly wrapped, labeled, and frozen. I found myself searching for a justification to decline the idea of acquiring a propane-powered chest freezer. But honestly, the only concern I could come up with was the potential strain on my propane supply. I found that to be satisfactory. I had been filling up my tank annually at around 40% of its 1,000-pound capacity. Next, I headed to the library to search for a manufacturer and model that caught my interest. I discovered a Blizzard chest freezer with a 10 cubic foot capacity, featuring ample insulation. Admittedly, it wasn't the most affordable option out there, but it was advertised to require 25 pounds of propane daily, which would help maintain my budget for annual refills. I could accommodate more than a quarter of beef or half a hog simultaneously. I continued to endure the trip to town for laundry. Oh, I realized I could have purchased an old wringer washer and powered it with the generator, then established a laundry line. I would consider it. I wasn't particularly eager to clutter the machine shed with more items. Additionally, I would require a pump to transfer water from the internal flume to the washer, and then I need to determine the best location to set up a clothesline. I decided that the first time someone at the laundry facility messed up my clothes, I would make a scene and invest in a washer. Somewhere, there must be an old Maytag electric model waiting to be discovered. Foolishness is revealed through actions. Keep that in mind. That foolish Mark had one too many drinks and started rambling about the cave in the mountain. It lingered as an unspoken truth among the elders, yet it ignited the curiosity of the younger crowd and spread rapidly. The next time I ventured into town for supplies, I discovered it when someone particularly clever began to speak up. I struck him down to the ground with the force of my seasoned hands. I began to dig into my pocket as I remarked, "You've got quite the mouth, kid. It's a shame it just led to your demise." I retrieved my pocket knife and ran my thumb along the blade's edge. As I extended my hand toward him, he maneuvered on his stomach a considerable distance from me before he turned over and sprinted away with urgency. I grinned and tucked my knife away into my pocket. The moment had arrived to pay a visit to Mark's parents. I informed them that I had made a vow to him a shallow grave awaited if he ever uttered a word about my cave, and I was prepared to honor that commitment. I advised them to ensure he was in good standing with the Lord, as he would be reaching out shortly. That marked the final occasion anyone laid eyes on or heard from that foolish Mark in those areas. I was summoned by the sheriff for an interrogation. I had him reach out to Mark's parents. His father uttered a single word, "Navy." I shot the sheriff a sly grin and strolled away. I swung by the bar to grab a beer. The bartender softly inquired about what had transpired with Mark. The silence was so profound, you might as well have heard a pin drop. I hesitated and replied, "You truly wouldn't want to find out." It was amusing. After that, the bikers began addressing me as sir. A touch of subtlety in performance can make a significant impact. Just before Christmas, I made a stop at the taxidermist's. I prepared 8 bear skins, pricing each large one at $500 and the smaller ones at $4. He deducted $400 for the deer skins that I had placed on him. I settled the payment and hoisted my cumbersome, plastic-wrapped packages out to the truck. I ventured to the butcher's to check out the specials available. He had prepared some delightful smoked bacon and had been experimenting with beef jerky. I sampled a portion and found it quite enjoyable. I purchased 4 pounds for $20 each. I completed my order, selecting 5 pounds of fresh ground beef and a couple of thick loin chops perfect for grilling. After some contemplation, I pivoted and inquired whether he had any uncured hams available. I purchased one for the smokehouse and then made my way to the grocery store to grab 20 pounds of brown sugar. I had come across the concept of a smoke and sugar cured ham previously. It was one of those classic Smithfield recipes that had become too costly to produce on a commercial scale. The effort required was considerable as well. The ham required regular attention, needing to be removed every few days, unwrapped, resugared, and then carefully rewrapped in canvas or gunny sacks. Even if it doesn't succeed, I'd only be down $50 eventually. I intended to put forth my utmost effort. What other plans did I have for January? I parted ways with my heavy woodworking equipment since it was merely gathering dust. I was determined not to allow it to deteriorate. It was far too valuable to remain unused, especially by someone who truly valued it. I held on to both powered and unpowered hand tools, as I could never predict when they might come in handy. I was in search of a pastime to engage my curiosity. I scanned the list of GPO titles to gain some insight. I was intrigued by 2 titles, viniculture and home winemaking. Incredible. Discuss a classic pastime favored by older gentlemen. I definitely had the room for a vineyard. I had noticed yet another elongated, narrow field facing south, situated a little further down the mountain. It needed to be addressed, naturally, but that was nothing new by that point. The soil needed testing, and I had to purchase rootstock. That spring, I would be planting my orchard regardless, so what difference did one more field make? What? However, I would require a space for the wine. Wine needs to mature in a serene, cool environment, typically within oak or beech barrels, correct? I promptly headed into town to access the library's internet and place my article orders. With the foliage fallen and the winter snows not yet hindering travel through the woods, I prepared myself the following morning, rifle in hand, and set out in search of caves. That day, my intention was not to delve into any caves, but merely to note their presence. I carried a small roll of vibrant orange surveyor's tape with me for that very reason. I would return with the tractor and wagon after discovering something intriguing to investigate. At the base of the mountain, I discovered a cave entrance situated near the northwest corner of the road. I have noted it down. I remembered that caves were frequently located along the same vertical path, though geological shifts occasionally caused the layers to tilt over the ages. With no hints to guide me, I found myself merely circling that entrance. Fortune did not favor me. I pressed on along the path, yearning for the changing light to reveal an opening before me. On an entirely different level, approximately 120 feet higher and oriented almost directly north, there was another entrance. Once more, I noted it down. Just beneath the cabin, where the trail sliced through the crimson brush, another cave entrance awaited. I noted it down and decided to wrap things up for the day. My legs felt weary. The mountain towered at over 1,100 feet, and I had navigated its rugged terrain since the break of dawn. My garments were grimy and drenched. My boots felt so squishy. My feet resembled shriveled prunes. It truly was a comforting experience to dry off and savor a warm drink by the fire. I retired for the night at an early hour. As dawn broke, I adorned myself in crisp, dry, cozy attire and new boots. I gathered a substantial flashlight, some rope, a length of white cord, a sturdy walking stick, a hefty knife, and an M1. I was prepared to embark on a cave exploration adventure. In the event I encountered an existing tenant, I brought along a few extra clips for the rifle and a chain. The initial cave I ventured into was indeed the very first one. The crimson bush lay stripped by the winter's chill, yet it remained a chaotic tangle. I carved my path to the entrance, discarding the severed limbs to either side. I began my journey of discovery through my sense of smell. The odor was somewhat unpleasant. A meticulous sweep with my flashlight revealed nothing but the vastness of a deep cave. I stealthily entered, the flashlight gripped firmly in my hand, illuminating the forestock of the rifle. After a brief walk, I encountered Mama. That's Mama Bear indeed. She nestled into the far end of a cave that resembled a tunnel, measuring approximately 38 feet in length and 16 feet in width. The roof and floor were surprisingly flatter than I had anticipated. I fired 3 swift shots into Mama's ear, then followed up with 3 more to the back of her neck as she attempted to turn away. She remained utterly still, as if time had paused in that moment. Given that bears aren't exactly known for their breath-holding skills, I thought I was safe. I went ahead and reloaded my rifle, nonetheless. The tractor groaned under the weight of the load on the chain, suggesting she must have tipped the scales at over 500 pounds. I employed the chain hoist in the machine shed to lift her into the pickup truck and set off for the butcher shop. Allow him to manage my colossal creation. I informed him about the contact for arranging the pickup of the hide for additional processing. Was it inappropriate to kill a hibernating bear? Most likely. Was it against the law? No. Was it a wise decision? Absolutely it was. I certainly wasn't eager to confront that fuzzy monster pig on her territory without having some kind of edge. Discussing this matter may not be wise. Indeed, I owned a winery. I needed to tidy up the cave, ensuring it was sanitized to avoid contaminating the wine yeast, and perhaps adding a fresh coat of paint wouldn't hurt either. As the weather turned pleasant, I envisioned reinforcing the front wall to create a 4-foot doorway and fitting a sturdy door to deter any unwelcome visitors. Meanwhile, another thought struck me regarding unexpected visitors. I intended to install sturdy doors, deadbolts, and reliable locks on the cabin, woodshed, machine shed, and smokehouse doors. Next, an additional Franklin stove, a table, chairs, and bedwood are placed in the outer cabin, accompanied by a propane-fired lamp to clarify the tank located in the back. I considered swapping out the gas-fired generator in the machine shed for a propane-fired one, but decided to hold off for now. Given the lull in activity, the contractor was keen to secure some projects. He embraced the door project and enhanced the windows with bars as well. He instructed his team to utilize a propane-fed salamander to warm the small cave, enabling them to clean it thoroughly and heat the rock around the entrance sufficiently to construct a sturdy masonry wall and an impressively heavy door. He crafted and fitted shutters that secured with a horizontal bar across all the windows on the inside, just in case I ever needed to lock the place down for a time. I envisioned a scenario where a group of misguided individuals, drawn in by tales of a well-appointed cave, would approach the winery, attempt to force entry, and ultimately leave in exasperation after failing to unlock the door. I held on to the hope that good old boy Mark never quite revealed the location of the cave during his boisterous ramblings. I truly had a strong dislike for Mark during that time. I envisioned delightful scenarios of him getting ensnared in a ship's propeller and turned into shark bait, or provoking a particularly skilled Muay Thai practitioner on an off day. The air was brisk, and the pups required a little extra nourishment. I tracked and captured a deer. Once I brought it home, I prepared it by skinning and cutting it up, then shared it with them. They took quite a while to realize that this intriguingly aromatic substance was meant for consumption. Then it was truly remarkable. Good God, Gertie. Remnants of bones lay scattered, accompanied by the unpleasant remnants that constituted their intestines. That's it. I caressed them and lavished attention upon them. At that moment, I was unaware that I had crafted a formidable duo of assassins. Rabbits found themselves in peril. Raccoons faced danger. The deer were in peril. Intruders? Speak the command, my lord. Kindly, utter the word. Utter the enchanting phrase. By spring, I had placed my order for the trees and vine rootstock. I absolutely loved the flavor of Concord grapes, so that's what I chose to purchase. The orchard was filled with an array of pears, peaches, sour plums, cherries, and 3 varieties of apple. I had a conversation with a gentleman regarding beehives. He mentioned that as they were just beginning, it was premature to establish a hive. The untamed bees had tended to my garden with great diligence. In maybe 2 years, as the trees and vines start to bloom, it will be the right moment for a hive. Otherwise, I would need to provide the colony with honey. He recommended that I sow clover in the spaces between the trees and tall blue fescue grass in any other suitable areas. It was resilient, capable of enduring heavy foot traffic and effectively suppressing rival weeds when nourished. The man appeared to be quite adept at his craft. I had faith in him. The garden was enriched with additional fertilizer, which I then incorporated by rototilling. Subsequently, it was sown and concealed once more. I didn't even need to take on the role of the protector with those dogs nearby. I noticed several areas scattered with feathers and found myself pondering how on earth they managed to catch the birds. Following the shoots, they largely overlooked their dry dog food for several months. I took them to the vet for treatments for roundworm, wireworm, and heartworm. The untamed creatures lacked that kind of safeguard. I didn't want them to pass away before their time with me was up. We all gathered on the porch in the evenings, unwinding together. I placed a chair outside and purchased a couple of thick braided rugs for them to rest upon. The spring and summer of '95 were truly delightful. Indeed, it appears that even the most joyous moments often conclude in the bleakest of ways. My former spouse came to visit. I picked up the phone when it rang at the gate. Benjamin Baker. Allow me passage through this dreadful gate at once. I responded with a smile. What part of go to hell and suck the devil's horns don't you comprehend, you self-righteous, relentless individual? I ended the call and severed the connections. She could wail with her eerie voice, and I wouldn't even bat an eye. At times, the divine presence beams with joy. A few Saturdays later, I ventured into town to gather some supplies. A loud, brash woman with vibrant red hair and an unpleasant scent abruptly handed me an envelope, exclaiming, "You've been served a hole." I delivered a swift kick to her groin, with considerable force. As she lowered her head to shield herself, I nearly took myself out by striking her squarely in the chin. As I laid her out cold, I was convinced that I had shattered her jaw. I was mere seconds from unleashing my fury when it struck me that I had become the focal point for a crowd of onlookers. I declared, combat flames with flames, everyone. Confront aggression with aggression, and before long, the predators will retreat. Perseverance is key. Always keep them on their toes. Absolutely not. Perseverance is key. I hurried to the sheriff's office, believing I might find a handful of allies there. The sheriff personally escorted me into his office. A prominent legal firm has arrived in town, and your name is on their radar. I tossed the envelope onto his desk. Could you assist me in understanding this better? With my encouragement, he carefully opened the envelope and revealed what lay inside. This is a formal notification requiring your presence. The details of the case are absent here. It's essential to engage an attorney to request a copy of the details and the evidence submitted to the court. I regret to inform you, Ben, but that is the extent of my capabilities. My hands are bound by legal constraints. Simply inform me of this. Are the castle laws from Texas applicable in Kentucky? He reclined in his chair, allowing his gaze to drift into a blur. There's a compelling case for me to affirmatively say yes, they do. Recent cases in Lexington and Louisville have established legal precedent regarding the infringement of marked property boundaries. He swiftly directed his attention to my face. Swift. Hire a contractor to install a fence along your property line. Let the damage be damned. Install the fence and ensure to place a post every 20 feet. Keep out. Exercise caution around the armed guard and attack dogs. This approach ensures you remain compliant with existing criminal laws, avoiding any potential legal issues. Give it your all, Bubba. I burst out of there and hit the ground at full speed. As I stormed into my contractor's office, the secretary let out a terrified scream, convinced that a robbery was unfolding. Be quiet for a moment and connect me with Chuck, please. I have an urgent matter for him. For an exorbitant fee, he assured that the fence would be installed and marked by noon the following day. Keep in mind, this was a stretch of fence spanning 11 miles. I was going to pay a hefty price. Chuck planned to reach out for support and assemble groups from various locations across the eastern part of the state, as well as from Virginia and Tennessee. However, that fence was definitely being installed. I needed to secure my dogs before they turned into an unexpected meal for someone. Next, I made my way to the county clerk's office. I handed the secretary a C-note and inquired, who is the most driven, sharpest, and most knowledgeable straight shooter among the lawyers around here? She flashed me a truly wicked smile. She retrieved the C-note, inhaled its scent, creased it neatly in half, and delicately stowed it away in her jacket pocket. Tom Everhart is essential. He devours ambulance chasers at breakfast, feasts on prosecuting attorneys for lunch, and savors judges for supper. Achieve greatness or fade into obscurity. She unleashed a glob of saliva onto her desk and forcefully brought her palm down upon it. Wow. If I didn't have such strong feelings towards women, I might find a way to appreciate her. I remarked, "You're quite the remarkable individual." "Thank you." I sought out the man and offered him $500,000 to represent me in my case. Bam! I had a military canine on the leash. I provided him with the case number from my documents, visited the bank to secure a few bonds, and then stopped by his office to transfer them to him. He felt a sense of joy. I was frustrated, yet life continued its course. I returned home to secure my dogs and comfort them until they calmed down. The following morning, I made my way to Tom's office. "Is your copy of her medical records still with you?" "They are securely stored in a safety deposit box located in Oak Park. I have been paying for the box rent for 2 decades, and it is solely under my signature, along with a passphrase and my thumbprint. I became quite meticulous about those records. A sense of unease washes over me. Let's go retrieve those records. Please remember to bring any receipts you have for that box." Awesome. I preserved it all. I have a signed copy of the written instructions for accessing that box, included in the same envelope as the key. We boarded a plane to Midway, followed by a luxurious limo ride to Oak Park. I requested permission to access the box. I was informed that it was unfeasible since it was currently under police scrutiny. Tom reached out to the Cook County Sheriff's Department to report instances of bank fraud and alleged collusion within the police force. Things escalated quickly. It appeared that the attorneys representing my beloved were unable to access the box to tamper with the evidence, so they exerted every effort to keep it hidden from our reach for presentation in court. When the county sheriff found himself unable to pull the plow, he reached out to the local deputy marshal for assistance. That certainly captured interest. The state police arrived in full tactical gear, while members of the Oak Park Police Department faced not only termination but also arrest for prosecution. A unit of military police was summoned to provide support for them. All kinds of unpleasant little worms emerged, but that was for others to ponder over. The records were obtained, stamped, and certified as untouched since their initial deposit. The sealed envelope accompanied us back to the courthouse, where it was photographed multiple times and officially entered as evidence. The county sheriff took action promptly and insisted on obtaining a certified copy for his records. My attorney advised me to leave. He seemed a bit annoyed when I mentioned that I didn't have a landline, neither a phone nor a carrier pigeon. He requested that I touch base weekly. I returned home to cultivate grapes among the trees. I needed to acquire an extended hose and a pump that could be attached to the back of the tractor to draw water from a spring-fed stream, ensuring the tree roots remained adequately moist during their crucial initial 90 days in the soil. Wow. Yet, fortune smiled upon me. I didn't lose a single one. What about the grapes? Fortune didn't favor me this time. I experienced a loss of 40% of my rootstock. I purchased another half shipment and gave it another go. This time, destiny or some unseen force was on my side. I merely lost a few vines. Young grapevines are sensitive and should not be handled too much. I refrained from intervening and allowed them to develop on their own. Only after they achieved 2 years of healthy growth could I run a wire and begin to shape them, but not before that. Their beauty was illuminated by the soft glow of the early morning light. I thoroughly sanitized the winery and applied a generous coat of epoxy paint to it. Constructing the barrel trestles became straightforward once I had a profile to reference. A straightforward plywood jig prepared me for a barrel shipment in just a few days. It required approximately 2 weeks to receive them, however. Upon their arrival, I placed them on their trestles and filled them with fresh water to expand the stakes. I wouldn't clear them out until the moment they brimmed with fresh grape juice. The 26 barrels would require nearly 10 years before they were all put to use. I also acquired 2 large, open-topped, straight-sided wooden fermentation tanks for my readings. The remnants were left behind after the squeezing, consisting of skins and pulp. With just the right amount of sugar and a touch of quality yeast, I could create the perfect starter for a fine brandy. It was known as pomace and necessitated multiple distillations and filtrations. If I could manage to squeeze and ferment a quality batch of sour plums, I'd be on my way to creating a starter for slivovitz, the Polish counterpart to LSD. From what I gathered, my attorney launched a powerful right cross and continued relentlessly until the prosecution's lawyers found themselves behind bars for evidence tampering. From that point onward, her situation deteriorated rapidly. I lingered on the courthouse steps, anticipation hanging in the air. What seems to be the problem, my friend? Were you turned down for your application to the Bella Abzug Society? She gazed at me and completely unraveled. My parents have passed away. All the funds vanished. My heart desires nothing but you. You foolish person. You attempted to condemn me. You pushed me aside. You caused me to feel animosity towards you. At this moment, I feel a deep disdain for you and for all women. The weight of your presence is almost unbearable, and I find myself tempted to take drastic measures to escape your draining existence. Anything you cannot possess, you tarnish to prevent others from having it. I despise you and everything you stand for. Do not ever set foot in my space again. Leave at once. I turned, trembling, and settled into my truck. More than 30 minutes passed before I managed to steady my hands enough to insert the key into the slot and finally drive away. I found myself at the bar, awakening there as the morning light broke through. I experienced a sensation as if a nail had been driven into my right eye. I was not in a suitable state for social interaction. I stealthily exited through the back door, located my truck, and drove home. Following a soothing bath, I returned to the comfort of my bed. The conflict had come to an end. What was it that made me feel so awful? I've reached the understanding that in a battle of emotions, there are no victors, only casualties. In the end, it seems that the legal professionals are the only ones who truly benefit. The bell chimed. Oh my goodness. This isn't the right time for this. I responded. Greetings? The figure was none other than the sheriff. Ben, I regret to inform you that I have some unfortunate news. Your former partner took her own life. She has passed away. Oh dear. I suspected that I was her final glimmer of hope, no matter how crazy it seemed. Now I had to gather the fragments. Understood. Just give me a moment to get ready, and I'll join you in about 30 minutes. Sound good? Absolutely, Ben. I possess a sense of patience. I arrived at the gate in under 20 minutes. I unlatched it, navigated my way through, and secured it once more behind me. I trailed him into the town. I took on the role of her conservator, as I am her nearest living relative, regardless of our marital status. I published her death notice in the Chicago Tribune for 3 consecutive days, as mandated by law, and then settled in to observe the claims on her estate. I received multiple claims, but I replied to each one with a standard letter that essentially stated, claim or no, connected or not. The property is in dire straits. Deal with it and move along. I recorded every detail. After a year, the bond came to an end, and I finalized her estate. I lost $400 that she managed to take from me, even after her passing. I shook my head in disbelief. Closure remained elusive. The sound was akin to nails dragging across a colossal blackboard, echoing endlessly in the vastness of space. The agony lingered on, unyielding. Only sorrow and resentment remained to define her existence. What a terrible pity. I felt as though I had been struck from behind with a heavy object, and the discomfort only persisted. I remained indoors and refrained from venturing out. If I required something, I managed without it. I fulfilled my basic obligations to the government while securing the remainder for myself. I fired, but I didn't manage to take down even one fool at the gate who kept pestering me with conversation. For almost 2 years, I found solace in my own memories, accompanied solely by the dogs. On a spring morning, I found myself awakening to the fragrance of blooming flowers. I strolled over to Alistair's residence to check on his well-being. He was absolutely thrilled to see me. He believed that I had kicked the bucket. I chose not to share what transpired. I mentioned to him that I spent some time by myself. He gave a slight nod. At times, life has a way of weighing you down. He had been there. He pulled out a couple of mason jars filled with what he referred to as the good stuff and offered me a taste. I had never experienced moonshine before. Allow me to share something with you. It takes some getting used to. As time passed, the clarity faded, and I found myself heading home. It's astonishing that I didn't wander off into the woods and find myself snuggling up with a badger for the night. The following morning was dreadfully early, if you catch my drift. I surveyed my surroundings and found them unappealing. I dedicated a significant portion of the week to thoroughly cleaning the cave. I even took the rugs outside to shake the dust from them and swept the floor clean. Everything from my bedding to my clothes was loaded into the truck's bed for the trip to town. I found it remarkable that the truck started. However, it indeed happened. Upon arriving in town, I found nearly all the coin-operated machines engaged simultaneously. I observed that my sheets and towels had become somewhat worn and frayed. My trousers were also a bit off in fit. I had shed a significant amount of weight. I picked up a few essentials, some underwear, socks, pants, and a few household items. My pillow was in such bad shape that I had to get a new one. I visited the fuel contractor to arrange for the refilling of the propane, gas, and diesel tanks. I visited the bee expert to discuss setting up a hive at my property and also grabbed some garden seeds from the agricultural co-op. That year, I decided to cultivate some rhubarb. It was a plant that thrived with wood ashes nestled around its base. I made a quick stop at the hardware store to browse through 12-volt pumps and 1-inch hose. I had to install a water line to the wine cave because there was no way I was going to carry all that water myself. I hired a trencher on a trailer to carve a straight furrow through the red bush, reaching just above the cave. I cleared a small area with a shovel and employed a hammer drill to lower a 1-inch water hose and an armored electrical line from the cabin's cave and the machine shed. The armored line also included 4 conductors for lighting, along with one dedicated to controlling the pump's operation. After completing the digging, I carefully filled everything back in, installed a few lights in the cave, and added 2 switches on the wall, one for the lights and another for the pump. I repurposed my bathtub into a water tank. It was spacious enough for a pony to roll around in, so I had no issue with a hose attached to one side. The sole challenge I encountered was threading the feed line through the wall and into the machine shed. That certainly required some effort. I visited the vineyard to take a closer look. The vines sprawled across the earth, a sight that even I recognized as troubling. I purchased a few wooden fence posts, some sturdy wire, and a side-mount post-hole digger for the tractor. After I positioned the wire about a foot above the ground, I began to carefully lift and drape the vines over it. I made every effort to avoid damaging or harming any of the vines. I came to understand that I was out of my depth, regardless of how extensively I studied the topic. I presumed that I made a wise choice. I published an advertisement seeking a retired vineyard and wine master. I came to the conclusion that I would never receive any interest from local publishing. Instead, I picked up one of those stylish glossy magazines at a large chain bookstore and flipped through the advertisements within its pages. I came across an advertisement for viniculture news. I dispatched a letter along with a check, intended for both a subscription and to feature my own advertisement in their publication. The advertisement was presented in this manner. Seeking a seasoned vineyard expert and wine master ready to share knowledge and oversee a new venture and shop. More than 40 Concord plantings have been established for 2 years now. A winery is a profound cavern nearby, where fresh beach barrels await, brimming with water. Seeking coverage, knowledge of wine cultures, and specialized expertise. Compensation and housing are open for discussion, along with my email address. I had been managing with a box at the post office. The USPS provided local rural delivery, so I placed a large box on a pole a few feet inside my driveway, positioned far enough in to deter any drive-by mailbox vandalism, yet close enough to the road to give the mailman a convenient spot to pull off and do his job. It had been some time since I had visited the winery, aside from the task of running the water line. I paused to refill the barrels, which had been left unattended for a couple of years. I found no slime molds, and when I took a sample with a hygroscope, the water in each of the barrels was clear. Everything appeared to be in order. Disappointing. I was concerned that I might have made a mistake by not installing a 110-volt line to the cave for the press. The space appeared rather bare, with only the barrels perched on their stands. I placed an order for some 2x6 planks and 4x4s. It took merely a day or so to assemble a sturdy work table using glue and screws. I took great care to meticulously seal and paint it, ensuring that no cultures could intrude. I made every effort to create a pristine environment. Instead of installing a 110-volt line nearly 150 feet underground, I decided to grab another small Honda generator for the cave. It featured a pair of wheels, and I would bring it outside each time it was needed. The structure resembled a large handcart. I believed it was an excellent design. It was rather tranquil as well. I dedicated a few mornings to exploring the orchard perched atop the mountain. The stillness enveloped the scene as the dawn's fog blanketed the earth, soaking my boots and the lush, damp grass beneath me. The trees were gracefully unfurling their buds in anticipation of spring's arrival. I pruned the vertical suckers and tidied up any overlapping branches. I simply allowed them to be on their own. They were managing perfectly well on their own. I let out a deep breath. The moment had arrived to sow the seeds in the garden once more. The rototiller emerged once again. Following a meticulous examination and lubrication, I declared the tractor fit for duty, and soon the field was cultivated. After 2 years of remaining untouched, the field was now adorned with thick grass and scattered clover blooms. Everything was turned under, watered, and covered with tarps to break down into humus, nourishing the vegetables. For a couple of weeks, no further action was taken in the field, allowing the grass and clover to wither and begin their decomposition. I purchased 6 50-pound bags of worm caps and laid them out beneath the tarps to initiate the digestion process. After a few more days, the earth beneath my hand, resting on the tarp, radiated warmth. The moment had arrived to sow the seeds. The tarps were removed. I delineated the rows with a line and stakes, then employed a small diamond point hoe to carefully hand seed the garden. After I finished, the tarps were put back in place. The area will be prepared for unveiling in approximately a week. I have received multiple letters regarding the winery position. The most captivating stories emerged from an elderly gentleman from Yugoslavia prior to the Kosovo-Bosnia conflicts. Liam Stone was his name. His letter revealed that he attended university to study viniculture and wine processing, followed by several years of apprenticeship at a commercial winery before he had to emigrate. He was a seasoned gentleman in search of a suitable spot to spend his retirement. He believed that my modest vineyard and operation would be sufficient to maintain his interest and allow him to stay engaged in the business. I sent a response to his address just south of Boston, inviting him to come and see what the place was like. He was a thrifty individual and took the bus to get around. We settled on me picking him up at the station in Hazard and driving him back to the mountain. He connected with my dogs effortlessly, kneeling down and smiling as he playfully nuzzled their ears. I guided him along the entire mountain on the winding path, opting for the tractor rather than walking. I detailed the various trees and shared my aspirations for some slivovitz to eventually emerge from the stone fruit trees flourishing off to one side. He nodded and smiled at my clumsy effort with the vines, suggesting that minimal intervention was best for their growth in the early stages. He elaborated on the necessity of incorporating an additional row of wire in the coming year, as they were on the brink of experiencing significant growth. They required organization more than they required to blossom and produce results. I gestured to a sunlit area and shared with him the tales of my conversations with a bee expert. He was absolutely thrilled with the winery. I detailed my process of bleaching and painting everything to maintain a pristine appearance. He tasted from each barrel to assess the water's hue and transparency. He accepted the position. I consented to prepare a location and install a prefabricated house for him. I cautioned him regarding the issues stemming from the absence of electricity and the constraints on water and waste management. I invited him into my cabin, then surprised him by revealing the cave door. He chuckled at the trickery. For dinner, we enjoyed some cold roast beef. I settled down on the bear skins and let him have the bed. In the early hours, he inquired about the location of the outhouse. I shared with him the story of the warm water outflow that nourished and enriched the vibrant red bush fields nestled just down the mountain. We navigated the tractor, searching for the perfect location to establish a home for him. We discovered a location with a southeast orientation that was supported by earth instead of stone, allowing for excavation and the installation of a septic tank. A spring emerged not too far away, bubbling to the surface. I brought a sample of the water to town for testing for E. coli. I aimed to ensure that the water remained free from any contamination caused by my sewage. I snapped a few photos and then headed into town to seek out someone who could sell me a manufactured home and set it up on a pristine site. The mountainside required excavation, and the resulting cut needed to be reinforced with timbers to mitigate the risk of a landslide jeopardizing the house. A model was discovered that appealed to him, and I coordinated the setup of one, including a carport, a 1,000-pound propane tank, a septic tank, and a water feed from the spring. I arranged for a local lab to analyze the water sample via the county health department. It was pristine. I had a feeling that it would be as spring emerged from the outskirts of the redbush fields. I provided Liam with a check for $40,000 to purchase a vehicle and to settle his affairs. He mentioned that he possessed numerous notebooks and books to pack away. I assured him that there was no hurry and encouraged him to take his time. The tarps were removed from the garden, and I found myself back on bird and critter duty for a few weeks. Then the canines seized control. They were aging, becoming less vigorous. They weren't young when I first acquired them, so it simply felt logical. I visited the shelter to pick up a few more large breed dogs for Andy and Sophie to work with. I wished they wouldn't make a foolish choice involving a skunk or porcupine. I ventured into the depths of the forest. Primarily, I examined the trees. I discovered several ash trees that needed to be removed. I had come across the emerald ash borer, and they appeared quite unhealthy. I swiftly had them trimmed and maneuvered out to the roadbed. I didn't even trim them until I could separate the limbs. I contacted the lumber yard to arrange for them to collect the debris and incinerate the slash along the roadbed. I meticulously searched for additional outbreaks, yet it appeared that I had escaped relatively unscathed. I had never delved deeply into the subject of tree diseases. This led me to reach out to a nearby university that offers a forestry program, inviting some students and a few professors to come and assess the remaining trees. I was pleased to compensate for the service. The construction contractor arrived and created quite a commotion for roughly a week. Once the necessary land was excavated, he reinforced the cut with large interlocking corrugated sheets, then adorned them with landscaping timbers to conceal the metal. I found it to be quite appealing, particularly after the spray gave the timbers a rich dark brown hue. He mentioned that a similar method was employed in the western regions to prevent rockfalls from affecting railroad corridors and highways. Count me among the impressed. After excavating a couple of holes, he installed a large plastic septic tank designed for pumping every few years. Given the quality of the water emerging from the spring, he extended a pipe deep into the earth where the spring surfaced, ensuring it was buried beneath the frost line. The earth was excavated to a depth of approximately 1 foot, and crushed limestone was evenly distributed and compacted. A handful of poured footings held the house aloft, while the LP tank rested upon the gravel beneath. The steps leading into the house were elevated enough for me to spread dirt across most of the area and sow some fescue seed to create a softer appearance. I became somewhat frustrated with myself. I hadn't cultivated a herb or flower garden. On one side of the smokehouse, across from the machine shed and adjacent to the cabin, I unearthed a small patch of land. Just downhill and across the path from the winery, I cleared a wide space of red and surrounded it with stone, digging deep to prevent the red bush from taking over again. In that spot, basking in the warm southern sun, I arranged 3 charming terraces of roses. I spread a thick layer of cocoa hulls across the area between the plantings. In a few years, it will surely present a pleasing appearance. I cultivated a variety of herbs in that garden, a mere line of the customary marigolds. I discovered a location with large potted bay laurel bushes and decided to transplant 4 of them. The chives, dill, mint, parsley, and oregano thrived effortlessly. Simply place them in the ground and observe from a distance. The rosemary was quite a challenge for me until I sought advice from an expert on my mistakes. Excessive water and an overabundance of fertilizer. I ultimately decided to purchase plants in large pots and left them in that spot. It appeared to thrive most on a wooden bench. The narrative unfolded similarly with sage and thyme. Liam came back driving a pre-owned Toyota pickup. Underneath the tarp, the bed was cluttered with wooden boxes. He had preserved every one of his old university notebooks. I was in awe of the determination it must have required to maintain a record of them over the years. I handed him the copies of the keys. There were not many at all. A single key unlocked every deadbolt on each door, while another one released the gate lock. A third unveiled his new abode. The tractor's key was suspended on the wall of the machine shed. I held onto my own key for the vintage Chevy pickup. That was the end of it. No more dashing about with a hefty ring of 40 keys. I extended an invitation to Alistair for an evening meal. I grilled some steaks, prepared baked potatoes, and served a bit of store-bought cheesecake. It was all enveloped in a quiet sense of gratitude. Alistair noted how much the cave had transformed since AL's time there. It was once shadowy, gloomy, and intimidating. He noted that the paint job and gas lights certainly transformed the space. The following day, I accompanied Liam to town to obtain his driver's license and establish a debit card for him, supported by a $250,000 account. If he chose to turn around and squander it, that's his loss. I would be aware, and he would find himself on the street. I felt positively about him, nonetheless. I thought he had experienced poverty for many years, which made him careful with finances, whether they were his own or belonged to others. I connected him with the librarian and ensured he had internet access before making my way to the university to check on the progress of my forestry project. They had made significant progress, yet a considerable journey still lay ahead. The professor observed that the fence had been toppled in one area. I advised him to equip his forestry teams and be vigilant for black bears. They cherished the cursed blackberries. I inquired about ways to draw in squirrels. He proposed warming a mixture of sorghum and dried corn in baking pans, then inverting it onto waxed paper and slicing it into blocks before it set. Next, place those on feeder platforms elevated above head height in the trees. They had arrived. Understood. I requested that he gather details from his teams regarding any spreading oaks on the mountain and provided him with a check for $500. I settled the payment with the charcoal maker for another brief load of wood and charcoal, marking the end of my business for the day. I set off for one of my beloved local dinners. A succulent deep-fried pork tenderloin sandwich accompanied by a rich, creamy coleslaw on the side. It was unfortunate that they couldn't whip up decent onion rings to save their lives, or I would have invested in a motor home and set up camp in the backyard. Perhaps it turned out to be beneficial. On the mountain, I took my time with dinner, my mind wandering to what I might have overlooked. The fuel situation has been addressed. The safety of my structures was satisfactory. The fence needed some fixing. I had to embark on a bear hunting expedition. The uncharted lower caves I had stumbled upon remained untouched. Surely, at least one of them concealed an unwelcome revelation for me. I held on to the hope that the surveyor's tape I had left to mark them was still in place. Now, what are the next steps? I definitely had no intention of venturing into a shadowy cave in search of a bear in its natural habitat. That would be equivalent to taking one's own life. I chose to establish a blind and bait. I found myself pondering whether there was any peanut butter left in my pantry. With that, my mind felt a sense of assurance that everything was in order, and I drifted off to sleep. I discovered a 1-pound jar of peanut butter and placed it in the freezer. I placed a note on Liam's door in the morning advising him to disregard any gunshots he might hear. I carefully secured the dogs to the porch, much to their dismay. Once the plastic jar was removed from the slug of peanut butter, it transformed into an enticing bait. I set out with my rifle, a blanket, a canteen, and a tarp in tow. Once I established my hide at the lowest cave, I placed the still frozen peanut butter about 5 paces from the cave entrance, then retreated to lie in wait for the creature. Bears possess poor vision. They pursue with their keen sense of smell. I anticipated that the strong aroma of the peanut butter would conceal any lingering scents I had, and my distance from the bait should have made it difficult to notice me. My hide was positioned crosswind to the cave, which gave me a sense of confidence. Large bear. It wasn't a grizzly bear, it was a brown bear. They were meant to be found in the upper Northwest, not in Kentucky, for crying out loud. Still, it was untamed. It was unrestrained and had made its home on my mountain. The circumstances were far from ideal. I pondered whether my 30.06 could handle the situation. He appeared large and heavy, even though it was springtime. I sensed that this one had acquired the skill to take down cattle. I focused intently on regulating my breath, paused to steady my aim with one eye, disengaged the safety, and pulled the trigger. The bear let out a thunderous roar, shaking its head vigorously before rising up on its powerful hind legs. The head continued to ascend higher and higher. As his mouth widened to unleash a roar, I took aim and fired 3 rapid shots into the cavernous expanse of his open jaws. He lost all concentration, faltered, and fell to the earth. My hands trembled, yet I successfully filled the rifle's magazine using a stripper clip from my shirt pocket. I moved in a bit closer, only to catch the sound of labored, hoarse breathing emanating from it. I meticulously aimed at his remaining eye and pulled the trigger, sending a shot through the interior of his skull. The entire form trembled and released a breath. I stayed far away from that thing. I made my way back to the machine shop to retrieve the tractor and chain. It required a solid 30 minutes to haul it up the mountain. I laid a tarp in the machine shed and secured it by the neck, then utilized the tractor to assist with the skinning process. After I managed to get the guts onto the tarp, I pulled the entire mess away for later disposal. The large chain hoist was specifically engineered for lifting engine blocks and similar heavy items, allowing it to successfully elevate the entire assembly off the ground. I secured another tarp in the truck's bed, then reversed the vehicle, tied the rear legs, and hoisted them into the bed. It took quite a bit of trickery to get that bear loaded. I showed compassion for the dogs and allowed them to roam free to explore the carcass. I lacked any garbage bags large enough to contain the skin, so I opted to wrap it in a different tarp. I was reluctant to travel down the road with the head dragging on the ground, so I took an axe to it and secured the entire thing to the front of the bed using a rope around its front paws. I still needed to keep the gate down. I believe I may have created a path of crimson leading straight to the town. The butcher had never encountered anything of that magnitude before. He needed to slice it into quarters merely to fit it into his shop. He trimmed the paws for me. I visited the sheriff's office to inquire about any reports of missing or mutilated cattle. Indeed, there had been a troubling surge of deceased or vanished cattle. I requested the deputy to kindly step outside to my truck for a moment. He remained silent, gazing at the enormity of the paws and head. I believe I've just put an end to your cattle killer. He dismantled my fence and took refuge in a cave. He stood at a towering height of 8 or 9 feet. I was unable to discern. He had also been enjoying good meals. The deputy was likely feeling quite fortunate that he avoided the need to fire at the creature. Not a single word escaped his lips. I drove away, leaving the taxidermist behind. Upon returning home, I spent hours cleaning up blood and mess. The lingering funky metallic odor at the back of the truck was unmistakable after I finished, prompting me to drive it back into town and run it through the car wash a few times. After that, I utilized the wand in the manual bay to clear away all the debris from the hinges and the bottom of the gate. That was the final straw. The butcher found himself at a loss with the abundance of meat on his hands. I instructed him to delegate the work to other butchers and simply reserve the tenderloins and the tongue for me. He estimated that approximately 600 pounds of meat were cooling in his cooler. It was larger than a full-grown male buffalo. He prepared a tenderloin for me to take along. The hour had come for me to return home once more. I needed to clean a rifle. I carved that tenderloin into steaks and roasts. That night, I attempted to grill one, but it turned out rather dry. I would need to research the process of smoking a brisket. I recalled a detail about placing some hog's belly fat on it, and then wrapping it for the smoker. That could work. A smile graced my lips. It's time for another thrilling adventure at the bookstore. After chilling, the meat was thinly sliced, pairing perfectly with sliced onion and mustard. The dogs absconded with the liver and heart. For some inexplicable reason, the kidneys were left untouched. I concealed the remnants of the dreadful deep within the forest. The following morning, Liam arrived, intrigued by the commotion of the shooting. I instructed him to check the wheelbarrow near the machine shed for some clarity. That's where I placed the head and paws. I smiled broadly upon hearing a loud, explosive sound. I had no idea he was fluent in Russian. In just one morning, I located the fallen fence, set a few posts in place, and secured the mesh with wire. I had nothing to go through the top. I'll sort that out later. After that, I set out to locate Liam. He tended to the vines, swiftly navigating the rows, snipping the florets with delicate finger shears. After completing a row, he leaned down to inspect underneath and began the row anew. He caught my gaze and straightened up, rubbing his lower back. It requires effort, yet it is necessary. There's no need for concern. I consistently find myself overlooking a few clusters. This fall, we'll have some table grapes, he said with a smile. I shook my head and handed him my canteen. I added a small slice of lemon, ensuring that even when it was warm, it was still enjoyable to drink. He took several swigs, sealed it up, and threw it aside. I appreciate it. I believe I've arrived at a pause for the moment. I can no longer endure this all day. My back just can't handle it anymore. I expressed my desire to head into town to check out the bookstore. He was completely on board with it. I had planned to delight him with my selection of the lunch spot. In addition to examining the biographies and the cooking section, I also took a look at the magazines. I came across a Lehman's catalog and added it to my collection to purchase. Then I noticed the newspapers. Several published an article about the rampaging brown bear that was brought down. The writer had clearly conversed with the sheriff, as he had the details correct. Even to the choice of rifle I'd select to take it down. All they had wrong was the count of shots. No, I didn't take it down with a single shot. It required 5. With a steaming cup of coffee in hand, I settled in to immerse myself in the article. Quite impressive. I found myself on the front page of the newspaper, and surprisingly, it didn't involve any death threats or jail time. That brought to mind the need to grab a few gallons of light molasses, 50 pounds of cracked corn, and 10 pounds of peanut butter. I had never encountered a squirrel that would refuse peanut butter. I purchased some Crisco to grease the pans and also picked up a roll of waxed paper. I decided it would be best to secure the squirrel baits to the shelves. The shelves and brackets would be crafted from a fallen tree, thanks to a chainsaw. A handful of nails, and that would solve the issue at hand. I flipped through the Lehman's catalog during our lunch break. I discovered the washing machine I had been seeking. A single phone call, and a unit was on its way. That was yet another extensive endeavor successfully managed. The pump was already prepared. I simply required a more compact length of hose. I had that set aside from when I trimmed the water line to size for the winery. In the quiet hours of the night, it dawned on me that a lingering obligation to my ex-wife, Evelyn, awaited my attention. She had been carelessly mistreated by her attorneys. In the stillness of the night, I rose and settled at the kitchen table, armed with a pad and paper. I provided specific names, case numbers, dates, and times. I held them responsible for abandoning her in such a desperate state that the only escape she could envision was to end her own life. They abandoned her without a dime, even though they had lost the case after being found guilty of evidence tampering by the federal marshals. I refined it until it conveyed precisely what I envisioned. It wasn't a critique or an opinion piece, it was an investigation. Once I felt satisfied with it, I returned to bed with a significantly improved mindset. In the early hours, I drove the truck to Hazard, where I organized to secure a half-page and had my piece published in multiple prominent Midwest newspapers the following Sunday. Many individuals prefer the Sunday edition over the daily newspapers. In this manner, it achieved the broadest visibility. I had aspirations to shatter the adversaries. In hindsight, I came to understand that she truly needed to be placed in an institution. I wished for her spirit to find peace. I had just crossed the 60 mark, and my retirement income was on the verge of starting. I chose to actively avoid any potential issues. Liam invested in a wine press that could also juice apples after they were crushed and stone fruit with the right pads. We have plenty of apples to begin experimenting with. He purchased an apple crusher and sifted through his notes until he discovered the recipe for an apple honey wine that he had learned was once highly coveted. I acquired several 10-gallon demi-barrels for some experimentation. The stone fruit underwent fermentation in a glass carboy equipped with a vapor lock. We needed to incorporate raw sugar since there wasn't a sufficient amount for the fermentation process from those tangy little fruits. The goal was to increase the alcohol content. After that, we acquired a low-rise pot still. Once the 20-gallon carboy completed its process, the contents were carefully skimmed, filtered, and then decanted into the still. Thus commenced the gradual and laborious journey of distillation. Following the initial distillation, we passed it through a vacuum-driven carbon filter, cleaned the still, and repeated the process. Following the third round of distillation and filtration, we ended up with nearly 5 gallons of exceptionally strong raw spirit. It was carefully kegged and left to mature in its own time. The apple honey wine was overly sweet. We allowed it to undergo a second fermentation until the alcohol content eliminated the yeast. We sampled that wine 6 months post-kegging, and it remained utterly undrinkable. We exchanged a glance and uttered a single word: brandy. We poured it into the pot still and crafted multiple batches. They all entered a new barrel. We immersed the original in lime water for some time, followed by rinsing it with clear water to remove any remaining traces. The brandy started off quite rough, yet it possessed that otherworldly sharpness we sought after. After 2 rounds of filtration, it was quite palatable. The keg was marked and set aside. At the conclusion of the year, we meticulously steam-cleaned all the equipment and applied a gentle layer of mineral oil before placing it into storage. The pears, cherries, and peaches failed to arrive that year. Indeed, they produced fruit, yet it was merely the size of a marble. In the meantime, the washing machine arrived. Everything was packed away. It was a solid, substantial machine. I needed to lay some drainage along the ground to direct the tank's runoff. It certainly surpassed the effort of doing it manually. I installed a doubled 40-foot plastic-coated steel cable for a drying line. The woods cast a gentle shadow, yet it fulfilled its purpose admirably. We would come up with something to occupy our time during the winter months. I was reluctant to install a closed line in the machine shed, yet there happened to be a stove in there at that moment. I have a growing concern about Liam with those bears appearing like clockwork. I purchased a 9mm Mauser for him, which was in quite good condition, along with 500 rounds of ammunition. The bullets measured the length of a large adult's hand in width. They measured 9.3 by 57. They lacked speed and weren't ideal for long distances, yet they could create a devastating impact on nearly anything within 300 to 350 yards. He focused on it and expressed his satisfaction. Indeed, if he struck a rabbit with one of those shots, he would dispatch it, prepare its hide, and lay it to rest, all in one seamless motion. Only a muted squeak would linger in the breeze, accompanied by a misshapen rabbit droppings. Once the garden ceased to yield, following the initial hard frost and preceding the first significant snowfall, we resolved to embark on a cave-clearing expedition. We bundled up against the chill and the gusts, sliced a bear's hide in 2 for our bedding, and set out to discover what kind of neighbors awaited us. While searching for his rifle, I stumbled upon some phosphorus torches available for purchase. They resembled parachute flares stripped of both the booster charge and the parachute itself. Each time we stumbled upon a cave, one of us would thrust the torch deep inside, while the other stood ready to fire at anything that might become agitated. We took down 2 wild pigs and another troublesome black bear sow. I believe those things had clear boundaries. What a mistake I made. We ascended to the midpoint of the mountain before retreating home for the evening. Every creature lay eviscerated, pulled aside from the path. We lingered in a comfortable silence after dinner, tending to our weapons before he departed for the night. The following day, we tidied up our chaos. I ventured into town to acquire a propane-fired chest freezer for Liam and exchanged the carcasses with the butcher for a diverse selection of 200 pounds of quality meat. I instructed him to fill a 10-cubic-foot chest freezer and then stepped back to let him handle it. Liam's eyes sparkled with excitement, and he beamed with joy when I first had him assist me in bringing in the freezer and setting it up. He practically danced with delight when I filled it up. He retrieved a pad and pen to catalog the labeled, hard-frozen packages as they were placed into the chest. In that moment, he realized he wouldn't have to fret about where his next meal would come from. When you've experienced hunger for some time, it becomes quite significant. Nourishment, hydration, garments, and a cozy place to rest. The remainder can take a hike. When it comes down to the essentials, he was indeed a wealthy individual. I regret to admit that I purchased his loyalty, but I did. I felt no remorse about it whatsoever. I had once more exchanged Alistair produce for eggs and the rare butchered bird that autumn. I had improved my canning skills, sufficient to stock his pantry with ample provisions for the winter and spring. I had ceased the butchering and smoking of my bears, yet I continued to pursue the art of smoked venison. I ensured that Alistair received his portion. At our Thanksgiving dinner, I made the introductions between Alistair and Liam. I had never learned the art of making a cheesecake. Perhaps it's due to the fact that I never invested in a mixer. I observed that the majority of cheesecake recipes emphasize the necessity of one. I ended up purchasing one. Go ahead, take your best shot. We enjoyed a delightful dish of warm rhubarb compote atop fluffy baking powder biscuits, accompanied by smoked turkey, creamy mashed potatoes, and rich gravy. I presented frozen spinach from the store, enhanced with a drizzle of vinegar and butter on top. It lulled all three of us in a slumber so quickly that we ended up enjoying the cheesecake with our coffee once we stirred from our nap. If I indulged like that every weekend, I need a hat just to figure out whether I was strolling or rolling. We engaged in a spirited game of euchre, full of competition, and then decided to wrap up the evening. For Christmas dinner, I prepared a slow-cooked smoked ham the night before. We enjoyed ham sandwiches and beer as we spent the day playing cards. I ventured into town to gather flour, sugar, salt, oil, fruit, various starches, and dairy products. It occurred roughly once a month. However, I might have opted out of the journey had I altered my choice of recipes. As I wandered through the aisles, I couldn't help but feel the weight of many gazes upon me. Not aggressive, merely observing. I was completely in the dark about what was happening. I felt a wave of anxiety, prompting me to purchase larger quantities than I typically would, particularly of flour, butter, canned beans, Crisco, sugar, and cheese. I purchased several containers of canned fruits, such as applesauce, along with a generous supply of evaporated milk. A sense of unease washed over me, hinting that my presence in town might soon be unwelcome. Whenever I noticed someone looking at me, I met their gaze with my own. They consistently turned their eyes downward without hesitation. I swiftly completed the payment and loaded the truck, then acquired a substantial quantity of flat roasts that would fit nicely in the freezer. I thought it was a bit of a gamble, yet I decided to drop by the sheriff's office to find out if he had any insights into the situation. Was I being held responsible for premarital sex, homosexuality, the division in the Catholic Church, and herpes, or what? When he elaborated on it, I felt as if I could have been toppled by a mere feather. The initial conversation unfolded with the bikers, delving into the reasons behind my choice to reside on the mountain. That became widely known. Subsequently, the Mark incident took place. I managed to take down a massive bear weighing 1,000 pounds that had been terrorizing the local cattle herds throughout the county. Ultimately, despite my notorious disdain for women, I invested a significant amount of money to dismantle the law firm that left my ex-wife in dire straits. The American Bar Association revoked their certifications, and the state special prosecutor took steps to dissolve the corporation. They had a track record of deceiving customers to the brink of financial ruin. None of their attorneys would ever take up their profession again. Individuals seemed hesitant to draw my gaze. A multitude of individuals bore the weight of guilty consciences. I let out a low grunt. Atonement nourishes the spirit. From now on, I refuse to roam the streets without a bulletproof vest. Ah, and your newly appointed wine connoisseur. His name is not Liam Stone, it's Butch. He is a renowned figure known for his patriotism and marksmanship. He shook his head in disbelief. No one in their right mind would dare approach your location without a well-equipped team of elite mountain-trained operatives. There's even a notum advising against flying over your mountain. Hey, Liam is just Liam. and that's all that matters to me. He's a decent fellow in search of a spot to settle down for his golden years. Ensure everything goes smoothly. If I need to bring on former SEAL team members who have retired from their service, I will do so. I have a source. Demonstrate respect to earn respect in return. If you're interested, I'd be more than happy to invite you out for dinner. Our apple brandy will be ready in a year or two. By next fall, we ought to be crafting our own wine. I hurriedly left that place and made my way back to the mountain, pausing only to refuel the gas tanks. The final remnants of the caves have been cleared away. No further surprises were uncovered. A man aboard an airplane captured high-resolution images of the mountain in both the morning and evening, highlighting the land features through the interplay of shadows. The absence of leaves in winter revealed far more than I had anticipated. As the snow melted away from the land, I arranged for prints to be made, subsequently marking the different caves and fields. I placed them behind glass close to my reading table. The paths were clear, and I successfully identified and noted the boundary line. It provided my concepts for the farm with much greater cohesion. On a March morning, Alistair just didn't awaken. He departed peacefully in his slumber. I found his body while conducting my routine visit. I utilized his telephone to reach out to the sheriff. As I awaited the arrival of the deputy and coroner, I took the time to tend to his flocks. The sheriff consulted the county clerk to gather information regarding that property. The property was free of liens and debts, yet the impending due date for the property tax loomed on the horizon. A will has been discovered. During the reading, I discovered that everything had been entrusted to me, completely and utterly. He was without any living family members. He was in his 90s, belonging to the generation that preceded my own. He had bravely served in World War II, and then continued to fulfill his duty in Korea. He lost his sole son to the Vietnam War. An executor was appointed by the court to handle the burial of his remains, settle the tax bills using funds from his bank account, and oversee the probate process of the estate. I continued to purchase grain for the birds and provided them with daily nourishment. Once a year had elapsed without any additional business or claims regarding the estate, the property deed was entrusted to me. I had no desire to broaden my business ventures into a bird operation, so I leased the entire setup to a local family of farmers who had experienced a setback. I engaged a local attorney to represent me in case any issues arose, as I intentionally made myself less accessible. Before listing the property, I thoroughly inspected it. I stumbled upon his hidden supply of spirits and the apparatus he used to make it. He had been purchasing in excess of grain beyond what the birds consumed. I found myself pondering the origins of his egg money, curious about the proportion derived from actual eggs versus that which stemmed from reprocessed corn. I have unraveled the process. He placed kernels between moist, gunny sacks to germinate, then crushed them into a wort rich in sugar. After the fermentation process was complete, he carefully distilled the batches, passing them through a lengthy, slender 10-gallon barrel filled with charcoal. He operated a bump tank, continuously refluxing the liquor back through the still until he disrupted the cycle. It was quite an elaborate setup. I needed to dive into the online world to grasp what was unfolding before me. I discovered a steel lockbox overflowing with hundreds. It measured like a compact footlocker. Alistair certainly had no shortage of wealth. I let out a snort. Honestly, I could have done without it given my financial situation, but I preferred to avoid any gossip in the neighborhood. I loaded all my belongings into the truck's bed and draped a tarp over them for protection. Being in the countryside, it was only logical to have some firearms on hand. Moreover, if any foxes or raccoons decided to drop by, what measures could he take to ensure the safety of his flock? Wave them away with a broom? Not at all. I came across a fine 12-gauge pump shotgun, AM 1911 Colt Commander secured in a shoulder rig, and a Remington Model 30 express chambered in .30-06 Winchester. It featured a quality 3x9x60 low-light scope. My friend was armed and ready. I won't claim that he was armed to the teeth for a conflict, but he certainly was in good shape. I definitely made sure not to leave any of that behind for the next person, either. I presented a jar to the sheriff and recounted my discovery. His face flushed with color for a moment, but then he found humor in it. The wily old man had him outsmarted for years. We gathered together, savoring a bit of his fine creation, reminiscing about the kind old man who had discreetly provided the entire county with exceptional corn liquor for more than 10 years, all without anyone catching on. That night, I secured a hotel room. My carpets were worn out, and the pads were ineffective. I chose to embark on a journey to Lexington to discover what treasures awaited me. During my exploration of various shops, I encountered an unexpected sight. A red orangutan donned in a floral dress and black flats approached me. A microphone was suddenly thrust into my face, prompting me to unleash my instincts without restraint. I struck her across the face and launched into a discourse on ethics, the importance of privacy, and the reprehensible nature of guerrilla journalism. After about 10 minutes of intense fervor, she made her exit, leaving her cameraman trailing behind in a distant second. I selected a variety of beautiful rugs, complete with pads, featuring a duo of vibrant Persian pieces that I intended to display on the cave walls. Then I set off for the bookstores. In the present day, much like other major urban areas, one can find the good, the bad, and the ugly. Fortunately, Lexington boasted a number of colleges and universities. This fostered the resources for a vibrant used bookstore community. I dedicated 2 days wandering from shop to shop, meticulously documenting their diverse offerings. A particular book stood out to me more than any other. It was a large, antiquated volume detailing the history and craft of the lute or stringed instrument maker. It was rather pricey, yet I seized the opportunity. After that, I began searching for additional literature on the topic. The choices were rather limited, but when I stumbled upon a volume with substance, it became a part of my collection. I certainly immersed myself in a great deal of literature. Liam stopped by to check on me after a week of keeping to myself. The table was a chaotic mess of notes, resembling the aftermath of a snowstorm. I arranged my notes and revisited my previous writings. Afterward, I revisited my work, carefully observing the details I had overlooked during my initial review. I believe I received a solid classical education on the topic. My manual skills seamlessly aligned with the task of cutting the progressive profiles needed for the back, connecting the body to the neck, steam fitting the body, and inserting the small strips that reinforce both the back and front, while also altering the sound of the final product. At last, I felt prepared to embark on my journey with my first instrument. I chose a ukulele because its compact size offered more flexibility, and you were looking for a sharp, vibrant tone from it. I placed an order for the tools, wood, tailstock, and peg assembly. I meticulously shaped the panels, sanding them to a fine finish before immersing them for 48 hours in a bubbling mixture of water, copper sulfate, and borax to ensure the pores were filled. I placed the pieces in a warm oven until they were thoroughly dried, then applied a light layer of varnish over them while they were still hot. After they were cured, I employed cabinet maker scrapers to refine the grain. I arranged the soundboard, secured the body with glue, attached the tailstock, and carefully positioned the neck. That cursed neck and its bridges caused me more trouble than I could handle. Nevertheless, the collaboration functioned flawlessly. The tautness of the strings ensured a firm connection between the neck and the body. I crafted the entire piece from hard maple, featuring a walnut back, an ash neck, and an ebony fingerboard. I brought it to a guitar maker in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, and compensated him for his critique. To be honest, I really took a beating. Nonetheless, it resonated more pleasingly than one crafted from plastic. Did I feel let down? Indeed, just a bit. Did I feel disheartened? No way. This was my initial endeavor, accomplished without any prior training. I anticipated having to sift through numerous attempts before landing on something that met my standards. Unless, of course, I bypassed the usual route and sought out a mentor or enrolled in a practical class. This was starting to seem like an effort that outweighed its value. Yet, I was either too foolish or too resolute to back down. It's likely a blend of the two. I entrusted Liam with the responsibility, purchased a basic cell phone, and shared the number with him, my lawyer, and the sheriff before heading down to Nashville to attend the winter-spring class on guitar building. The course spanned a comprehensive 14 weeks, convening 3 times each week, complemented by 2 days dedicated to lab work. I took my small ukulele with me, along with a toolbox full of instruments. I have always preferred to use my own tools and keep others from using them as well. I invested a lot of effort in maintaining my blades, so I can't rely on just anyone to avoid damaging the edges. I donned a sports tank top reminiscent of a basketball jersey, showcasing the solid muscles I had developed from my time working in the fields. When a certain individual began to take an interest in my toolbox, I made it clear that such curiosity could lead to a serious injury, and he took my warning to heart. I didn't possess anything as elaborate as a job box, but I ensured my toolkit was securely locked and chained in the lab whenever I wasn't present to keep an eye on it. The instructor connected my small experiment to a device and was taken aback to discover that it had a high end that simply wouldn't stop. He inquired about the technique I used to achieve that effect, so I shared my notes with him. He mentioned that the use of metallic salts for pickling likely rendered the wood less responsive to the soundbox's waves, and suggested that either a faster pickling process or a softer, more porous wood such as basswood might achieve the desired effect I was looking for. Much of the class time was dedicated to demonstrating the frequency responses of different types of wood, varying thicknesses and finishes. He possessed a clever training device that enabled us to adjust the strips connected to the interior of the top, allowing us to observe the impact on the frequency response. I found it quite interesting and noted the manufacturer's details on the machine's casing. I found it peculiar since the same method of preservation was utilized for insect protection centuries ago. Perhaps they intentionally kept the wood more textured within the soundbox, or even carved grooves to enhance sound baffling. That led me to consider scoring the inside of the sidewood prior to steaming it, not just for added strength, but also for its impact on frequency response. I experimented with it in the dreadnought I constructed for my class project. I found that it functioned quite effectively. It dulled that sharp jig that numerous instruments possess. Undoubtedly, achieving the correct spacing of the grooves was crucial. It was entirely about harmony. The G4 note possesses a wavelength of 88.01 centimeters, which meant it was simply a matter of experimenting with harmonics, as achieving a folded path of that length within a guitar body was impossible. Having a decent guitar, I figured it would be quite sensible to learn how to play it. After a handful of lessons, I began honing my seasoned skills. Approximately a year later, I returned to present my teacher with a standing bass that I had constructed. As I bent down, the sound that emerged was reminiscent of a bull roar. Untamed, the harmonics danced around, creating an electric atmosphere that sent shivers down my spine. His as well. That has been my primary focus over the last few years. My most recent endeavor features 2 layers of metal strings, one set placed above the other. The upper set is played, while the lower set serves as resonators, similar to the strings of a mandolin. The sound it produces sends shivers coursing through me. As I engage with it, the dogs disperse, and the birds soar into the sky. Liam has been subtly suggesting that a violin would make a perfect Christmas gift for him. They can be quite the challenge to perfect, but perhaps it's time to push my limits once more. I'm curious about the sound of a violin crafted from straight-grained hickory. I should check with Liam to see if he has a preference for a soprano or an alto. Who can say? Perhaps, in the future, the Tales of Bloody Mountain will recount the tragic fate of the gypsies who lost their lives there, and how their souls continue to dance upon the winds even now. Dear audience, we invite you to share your insights in the comments section below. Also, remember to like, share, and subscribe to stay connected.